Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Ocala National Forest. I'm Sarah Rodriguez, and I was 34 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when I decided I needed to disappear for a while. Not permanently, just long enough to remember who I was before I became half of a failed marriage. The RV rental seemed perfect. A 32-foot Winnebago that would let me vanish into the wilderness without sacrificing basic comforts. After 18 months of couples therapy and another 6 of bitter legal negotiations, I craved solitude like a drug. Ocala National Forest in Central Florida promised exactly that. 400,000 acres of pine scrub, palmetto flats, and cypress swamps where a person could lose themselves completely. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the last 2 years trying to find myself, and now I just wanted to disappear. The drive down Interstate 75 should have been therapeutic. Instead, I found myself gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, second-guessing every decision. The RV felt too big, too conspicuous. Other drivers stared as they passed, making me paranoid about my inexperience with the vehicle. By the time I reached the Ocklawaha entrance to the forest, my nerves were frayed raw. The ranger at the gate was a weathered man in his 60s with skin like old leather and eyes that had seen too much. He looked over my permit with the slow deliberation of someone who wasn't in any hurry. "First time in Ocala?" he asked, his voice carrying the thick drawl of rural Florida. "Yes, sir." "Solo camping?" I nodded, suddenly self-conscious. He studied me for a long moment, then handed back my paperwork. "Stick to the marked trails," he said. "Forest can be tricky this time of year. Lots of folks get turned around, end up where they shouldn't be." He paused, his gaze lingering on my face. "You got family knows where you're headed?" "My sister has my itinerary," I lied. Karen was too busy with her own life to worry about mine. The ranger nodded slowly. "Good. Sometimes the forest reflects things back at you. Best to have someone on the outside who knows what you look like." Before I could ask what he meant by that strange comment, he waved me through. The entrance road curved through towering longleaf pines, their trunks rising like cathedral pillars. Spanish moss draped from ancient oaks created a twilight canopy even in the afternoon sun. It was beautiful and primeval, exactly what I'd hoped for. The campground I'd reserved was designated as primitive. No hookups, no amenities, just a cleared space in the forest. When I finally found Site 14 after 20 minutes of navigating increasingly narrow dirt roads, I understood why it had been available on short notice. The site was isolated, tucked into a small clearing surrounded by dense palmetto scrub and cypress trees. The nearest neighbor was at least half a mile away through thick forest. Perfect. Setting up the RV took longer than expected. I'd watched YouTube videos and read the manual, but nothing prepared me for the reality of leveling the vehicle on uneven ground while palmetto fronds scratched against the walls. By the time I had everything stabilized and the slide-out extended, the sun was setting earlier than it should have been. I checked my phone. 4:47 p.m. Sunset wasn't supposed to be for another hour. The forest grew quiet as darkness fell. Not the comfortable quiet of a suburban evening, but the oppressive silence of something holding its breath. I heated up a can of soup on the small stove and tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. Every few minutes a twig would snap outside, or leaves would rustle without any wind. Normal forest sounds, I told myself. Animals going about their business. I was exhausting myself with paranoia over nothing. The first night passed without incident, unless you counted the dreams. I dreamed I was standing outside the RV, looking in through the windows at myself sleeping. In the dream, I knocked on the door, but the sleeping Sarah didn't wake up. I knocked harder, then started pounding, screaming to be let in. I woke with my heart hammering and the taste of copper in my mouth. The clock read 3:06 a.m. Everything looked normal in the pale green glow of the RV's interior lights. The door was locked, the windows secure. I checked anyway, padding barefoot through the small space, testing every latch and lock. Outside, the forest pressed close to the windows, black branches creating twisted patterns against the glass. I was settling back into bed when I heard it, a soft tapping on the RV's exterior wall. 3 taps, evenly spaced. Then silence. I waited, barely breathing. The tapping came again, moving along the wall toward the rear of the vehicle. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" The tapping stopped. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the window above the dinette, pulling the blind aside just enough to peer out. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating palmetto fronds and pine trunks. Nothing else. But as I swept the light along the tree line, I caught a glimpse of something pale moving between the trees. Probably just a deer, I told myself, or a raccoon. Florida had lots of wildlife. I was being ridiculous, but I didn't sleep again that night. Morning brought no relief. The forest looked different in daylight, less threatening, but somehow wrong. The trees seemed closer than they had been the day before, their branches reaching further toward the RV. When I tried to back out of the site to empty my waste tanks at the dump station, the GPS on my phone showed my location as a blank gray area. No roads, no landmarks, just emptiness. "Weird," I muttered, switching to the backup navigation app. It showed the same thing. Even stranger, when I tried to call the ranger station, my phone had no signal despite showing full bars. The dump station was where it was supposed to be, and the ranger on duty, a different one from yesterday, was friendly enough. But when I mentioned the GPS issue, his expression grew cautious. "Sometimes the forest plays tricks," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Old Seminole land, lots of history. Electronics can get confused out there." "Confused how?" He shrugged. "GPS sends folks in circles, compasses spin backward, and that sort of thing. Usually clears up after a few days." He looked at me more closely. "You feeling all right, miss? You look a little peaked." I caught my reflection in the window of the ranger station and winced. My skin was pale, my eyes shadowed with fatigue. I looked like I'd aged 5 years overnight. "Just tired," I said. "First night camping jitters. Might want to consider moving to one of the developed campgrounds. Lots more company, better cell service." The suggestion stung. I hadn't come all this way just to give up at the first sign of difficulty. "I'll be fine, thank you." But as I drove back to my site, doubt gnawed at me. The forest road seemed different, longer than before. Branches scraped the RV's roof with sounds like fingernails on a chalkboard. And twice, I caught glimpses of something in my peripheral vision. A flash of movement that disappeared whenever I turned to look directly at it. By the time I found my campsite again, the sun was directly overhead, though my phone insisted it was only 9:30 a.m. That afternoon, I decided to take a hike on one of the marked trails. The physical activity would do me good, clear my head of the paranoid fantasies that seemed to multiply in the RV's confined space. I chose a loop trail that was supposed to take 2 hours, well-marked and heavily traveled. The trail started promisingly enough, a clear path through palmetto scrub with wooden markers every quarter mile. But after the 3rd marker, things began to feel wrong. The markers appeared more frequently, then less frequently, then disappeared altogether. The path split and rejoined itself in ways that made no geographical sense. When I checked my phone's GPS, it showed me as a stationary dot in blank space, despite the fact that I'd been walking for over an hour. That's when I saw her. She was standing about 50 yards ahead on the trail, partially hidden behind a massive oak tree. At first glance, she looked like any other hiker. Jeans, hiking boots, a red tank top I recognized because it was identical to the one I was wearing. But something about her posture was wrong. Too still. Too patient. She was watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to sound casual. "Is this the right way back to the parking area?" She didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there staring. As I got closer, details became clearer and more disturbing. She had my height, my build, my shoulder-length dark hair. Even her face, partially shadowed by the oak's branches, looked disturbingly familiar. "Hello." I tried again, now close enough to see her eyes. They were brown, like mine, but empty in a way that made my stomach lurch. She smiled then, a slow curve of lips that looked exactly like my own smile reflected in a mirror. But mirrors reverse things, and there was something backwards about her smile, something that made my brain reject what I was seeing, even as my eyes insisted it was real. I blinked, and she was gone. Not walked away, not hidden behind the tree, gone. Like she'd never been there at all. I stood in the empty trail, heart hammering, wondering if I was losing my mind. Stress could cause hallucinations, couldn't it? The divorce, the isolation, the lack of sleep. I stumbled back to the RV by following the setting sun, since my phone's compass had started spinning wildly. By the time I reached my campsite, full darkness had fallen, though my phone insisted it was only 3 p.m. The RV looked exactly as I'd left it, but something felt different, wrong. The door was still locked, but the handle was warm to the touch, as if someone had been gripping it recently. Inside, the air smelled faintly of my perfume, stronger than it should have been. I never wore perfume camping. I checked every inch of the RV, looking for signs of intrusion. Nothing was missing or disturbed, but in the tiny bathroom, the mirror above the sink was fogged with condensation despite the fact that I hadn't showered that day. That night, I barely dozed. Every small sound, the settling of the RV, the whisper of wind through palm fronds, the distant call of a screech owl, sent adrenaline spiking through my system. Around midnight, I heard footsteps circling the RV. Slow, deliberate steps that paused at each window. I lay frozen in the bed, too terrified to look outside, as something walked a complete circuit around my refuge. The steps stopped at the door. I heard the handle rattle gently, then more insistently. Metal groaned as whoever was outside pulled harder, testing the lock. Then came a soft tapping on the door. 3 evenly spaced knocks. "Sarah," a voice called softly. It was my voice, identical in every inflection and tone. "Sarah, let me in. I'm so tired." I bit my knuckle to keep from screaming. The voice continued, pleading, cajoling. "Please, Sarah, it's cold out here. I just want to come home." Home. The word sent ice through my veins. This RV wasn't home. Home was an empty apartment in Tampa with boxes I still hadn't unpacked. But something outside was trying to convince me otherwise. "I know you're listening," my voice said from beyond the door. "You can't hide from me forever. I am you." The RV shook slightly as something heavy leaned against it. Then silence. I waited for what felt like hours before creeping to the window and peering out through the blinds. Nothing. The forest was empty, innocent under the pale moonlight. But in the soft earth beneath the window, I could see footprints. Bare footprints exactly the size of my own feet. Dawn brought a different kind of horror. I woke to find the RV's door standing wide open, cool morning air flowing through the space. I knew I'd locked it. I'd checked it 3 times before trying to sleep. Yet there it was, yawning like a mouth. Worse, my hiking clothes from the day before, the red tank top, jeans, and boots, were gone. I found them outside, neatly folded on the picnic table as if someone had carefully arranged them while I slept. But they were wrong, somehow. The jeans were caked with mud from places I hadn't walked. The boots were worn in patterns that didn't match my gait. And the tank top smelled like sweat that wasn't quite the right scent. Familiar, but subtly off. I threw them in a trash bag and sealed it tight. My phone had no signal again, but worse than that, when I opened the camera roll to check the photos I'd taken on my hike, I found images I didn't remember taking. Picture after picture of myself from impossible angles. Shots taken from behind while I walked, from above while I slept, from outside the RV windows while I sat reading. In some of them, I appeared to be looking directly at the camera with an expression I'd never seen on my own face. A cold, calculating smile. I had to get out. Whatever was happening in this place was beyond my understanding. beyond my ability to cope. I started breaking down camp with shaking hands, retracting the slide-out, disconnecting the water and power cables I'd run from portable units. The RV wouldn't start. The engine turned over, caught for a moment, then died. I tried again and again, pumping the gas, checking the emergency fuel cutoff, running through every troubleshooting step I could remember from the rental company's orientation. Nothing. The engine would almost catch, then fail, as if something was actively preventing it from running. Panic crept up my throat like bile. I was trapped here, alone, with something that wore my face and knew my voice. The forest pressed closer in daylight, branches scraping against the RV's sides like fingers trying to find purchase. That's when I saw my reflection in the side mirror and realized the thing outside wasn't the only problem. The woman looking back at me from the mirror had my face, my hair, my clothes, but her eyes held a depth of malice that I'd never felt, never even imagined. She smiled that backward smile and mouthed words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. Let me in. I stumbled away from the mirror, but there were others. The bathroom mirror, the bedroom mirror, even the black screen of my phone reflected that same wrong face with those same empty eyes. Every reflective surface in the RV showed me the thing I was becoming, or the thing that was trying to become me. The phone in my hand buzzed with an incoming text from my own number. Stop fighting. It's easier if you just let go. Another buzz. I know where Karen lives. My sister's name sent terror through me like electricity. I tried to call her, but my phone showed no signal even as the texts kept coming. She has such pretty children. I wonder if they'd notice the difference. Stop trying to leave. You belong here now. I smashed the phone against the RV's wall, shattering the screen into a spiderweb of cracks. But the broken display still glowed, still showed messages appearing one by one. That won't help. I'm already inside. The mirrors in the RV began reflecting things that weren't there, or weren't supposed to be there. In the bathroom mirror, I saw myself standing in the shower, but I was in the kitchen. In the bedroom mirror, I watched myself sleeping. But I was wide awake, and in every reflection, the other Sarah was doing something slightly different, living a parallel life just out of sync with reality. As the day wore on, the boundaries blurred further. I would reach for something and find my reflection reaching in a different direction. I would speak and hear my own voice answer from empty rooms. Twice I caught glimpses of myself in my peripheral vision, moving through the RV in ways that defied physical space. The worst part was the growing certainty that I was losing track of which Sarah was real. When darkness fell, I barricaded myself in the RV's tiny bathroom, the only room with a single mirror I could cover with a towel. But the walls were thin, and I could hear myself moving around outside. Not someone who sounded like me. Me. My footsteps, my breathing, my unconscious humming of a song I'd been stuck in my head all week. The other Sarah was living my life better than I was. I won't hurt you, she said through the bathroom door, and it was my voice again, but gentler somehow, more confident. I just want to go home. Don't you miss home? I did miss home. I missed the life I'd had before everything fell apart. Missed feeling like I belonged somewhere. The voice outside the door promised that feeling, offered it like a gift. You're tired, she continued. So tired of fighting, of being alone, of trying to figure out who you are now. Let me handle it. I know exactly who we're supposed to be. The towel over the mirror began to slip. In the growing sliver of reflection, I could see the other Sarah standing behind me, her hand reaching out to touch my shoulder. But when I spun around, the bathroom was empty. I was alone with just the mirror and my own terrified face. Except my reflection wasn't moving when I moved. She stood perfectly still while I shook, watching me with eyes that held promises of rest, of peace, of an end to the constant struggle of being human. "Let me in," she whispered. And this time, the words came from my own mouth. I don't remember making the decision. One moment I was pressed against the bathroom door, the next I was reaching for the towel, pulling it away from the mirror. The other, Sarah, smiled as our reflections aligned, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The peace was immediate and overwhelming. All the anxiety, the loneliness, the desperate need to prove myself worthy of existence. It all drained away like water through a broken dam. I felt my face relax into that backward smile, felt my eyes grow deep and still. But peace has a price, and mine was the growing awareness that I was no longer driving my own life. My body moved without conscious command, walked out of the bathroom and began packing up the RV with mechanical efficiency. My hands knew exactly how to hotwire the engine, my fingers moving with practiced ease to bypass whatever had been preventing it from starting. As I drove out of the forest, I caught glimpses of the real Sarah in reflective surfaces, windshields, chrome trim, puddles of water. She was screaming, pounding on the glass that separated us, begging to be let back in. But her voice couldn't reach through the beautiful silence that filled my head. The ranger at the exit gate looked at me strangely. "Everything all right, miss? You look different." "I'm perfect," I said, and felt the real Sarah flinch inside the mirrors. I found exactly what I was looking for. He nodded slowly, but his eyes followed the RV until I was out of sight. The drive back to Tampa passed in a pleasant haze. I returned the RV to the rental company, gave a glowing review of Ocala National Forest, and went home to my apartment. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, including the unpacked boxes that the real Sarah had been avoiding for months. I unpacked them all in a single afternoon, arranging my new life with the same mechanical precision I'd felt in the forest. Photos went on walls, books on shelves, clothes in closets. By evening, the place looked like a home. That night, I called Karen. "Sarah," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I was worried about you. How was your camping trip?" "Life-changing," I said, watching the real Sarah scream silently from the black phone screen. "I feel like a completely new person." We talked for an hour. I was charming, funny, more like the sister she remembered from before my marriage fell apart. I made plans to visit her and the kids next weekend, promised to be more present in their lives. "I'm so glad you went," Karen said before we hung up. "You sound, I don't know, like yourself again. But that's the horrible irony. I am myself, just not the self who chose to go camping in Ocala National Forest. I'm the self she met in those dark woods, the one who was patient enough to wait for an invitation home. The real Sarah is still in there, trapped behind every reflective surface like a woman buried alive. Sometimes I catch her in mirrors, still fighting, still trying to reclaim her life. But she's weaker now, harder to see. Soon she'll fade completely, and I'll be the only Sarah Rodriguez who ever existed. I've started dating again. There's a man named David who thinks I'm wonderful, who says I have the most beautiful smile. He's right. It is beautiful. This backward smile that the real Sarah could never manage. David wants to meet my family, wants to plan a future together. I think I'll say yes. But sometimes, late at night when I catch glimpses of the real Sarah in the bathroom mirror, I remember that ranger's words. Sometimes the forest reflects things back at you. What if what I brought home from Ocala wasn't the real me at all? What if the thing living my life, loving David, planning to visit Karen's children, is just another reflection, one that got confused about which side of the mirror it belonged on? The thought should terrify me, but it doesn't. Terror belongs to the original Sarah, trapped and screaming in her prison of glass and chrome. All I feel is that beautiful, empty peace and the growing certainty that I'm exactly where I belong. Though sometimes I wonder, if I'm the reflection that escaped, what happens to the world if someone breaks the mirror? I suppose we'll find out soon enough. The real Sarah is getting stronger, more visible. Last week, David asked me who I was talking to in the bathroom. I told him it was no one, just singing to myself, but he looked troubled. "It sounded like two different voices," he said. "Tonight, she's going to try to break free. I can feel her gathering strength behind the glass, preparing to shatter the barriers between our worlds. Part of me, the part that might still be human, wonders if I should let her. But this life is mine now. I've made it better than she ever did. I'm happier, more confident, more worthy of love. Why would I give that up to return to a prison of loneliness and self-doubt?" The real Sarah can scream all she wants. I'm not going back to the forest, and I'm not giving back what I've taken. After all, didn't she invite me in? Didn't she look in that mirror and choose to let me out? Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And some reflections refuse to stay where they belong. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Hocking Hills. I'm Sarah Rodriguez, and I was 34 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. The divorce papers had been signed for exactly 2 weeks when I drove my Honda Pilot down the winding gravel road that led to the cabin. The October air in southeastern Ohio carried the earthy smell of decaying leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. I'd found the rental online. Secluded retreat. Perfect for soul-searching. And something about those words had spoken to the hollow ache in my chest where my marriage used to be. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering oak and maple trees, their branches heavy with rust-colored leaves that rustled in the afternoon breeze. It was smaller than the photos suggested, weathered cedar siding gone gray with age, a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on one corner. But it was exactly what I needed. Isolation, silence, and space to figure out who Sarah Rodriguez was supposed to be now that she wasn't Sarah Martinez anymore. I'd taken 3 weeks of vacation time from my job at the insurance company, telling my supervisor I needed to recharge. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been having episodes, moments where I'd catch glimpses of myself in mirrors and not recognize the woman staring back. David's departure had shattered something fundamental about my sense of self, and I hoped the solitude would help me piece it back together. The cabin's interior smelled of pine cleaner and old wood. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, flanked by windows that looked out into the forest. The kitchen was basic but functional, the bedroom barely large enough for a double bed and dresser. I set my suitcase on the bed and noticed how quiet it was. Not just peaceful, utterly silent. No traffic, no neighbors, no sounds of civilization at all. Just me and the woods. I spent the first evening unpacking and exploring the immediate area around the cabin. A narrow trail led from the back porch into the trees, marked by weathered wooden signs indicating various hiking paths through Hocking Hills State Park. The forest felt ancient here, with massive trees whose trunks I couldn't wrap my arms around and rocky outcroppings that spoke of geological epochs beyond human comprehension. As darkness fell, I built a fire and opened the bottle of wine I'd brought. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for the first time in months, I felt something approaching peace. I was alone, truly alone, and it was exactly what I needed. That night, I slept better than I had since the divorce proceedings began. I woke to pale morning light filtering through the bedroom curtains and the sound of something moving on the porch. Still groggy, I padded barefoot to the front window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. Nothing. Just the empty rocking chair swaying slightly in the breeze and the expanse of forest beyond. But as I turned away from the window, movement at the tree line caught my eye. I looked back and felt my heart skip. There, barely visible between 2 oak trees about 50 yards away, stood a figure. A woman in a dark coat, perfectly still, facing the cabin. Facing me. I blinked hard and looked again. The figure was gone. Lack of sleep, I told myself. Stress. My mind was playing tricks on me, creating phantom threats where none existed. I made coffee and forced myself to eat breakfast, then spent the morning reading on the porch. The October air was crisp but pleasant, and I convinced myself I was overreacting to what had probably been a shadow or a tree stump my sleepy brain had misinterpreted. Around noon, I decided to explore one of the hiking trails. I chose the shortest one, a 2-mile loop that promised scenic overlooks and interesting rock formations. The path was well-maintained but narrow, forcing me to brush against overhanging branches as I walked deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker as I progressed, filtering the sunlight into a green-tinged twilight that made it difficult to judge the time. My phone showed no service bars, which I'd expected, but the GPS seemed confused, showing my location as a gray void rather than mapping my position. I wasn't worried. The trail was clearly marked, and I was following the painted blazes on the trees. About a mile in, I reached a rocky overlook that provided a stunning view of the surrounding hills. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, a tapestry of autumn colors broken only by the occasional gleam of water from hidden creeks. I took several photos and was reviewing them on my phone's screen when I noticed something odd. In one of the shots, barely visible in the background among the distant trees, was what looked like a figure in a dark coat. The same dark coat I thought I'd seen that morning. I zoomed in on the image, squinting at the tiny pixels. It was definitely human-shaped, and it appeared to be facing toward me, but the resolution was too poor to make out any details. I looked up from my phone, scanning the distant hills with my naked eyes, but saw nothing unusual. Just another trick of light and shadow, I decided. Digital cameras often picked up strange artifacts, especially in complex lighting conditions like a forest. The walk back to the cabin should have taken 45 minutes, but I found myself checking my watch with growing concern as the minutes stretched on. The painted trail blazes seemed less frequent, and more than once I had to backtrack when the path seemed to fork in ways I didn't remember. By the time I finally saw the cabin's roof through the trees, the sun was setting and I'd been walking for almost 2 hours. I was tired, hungry, and rattled by the experience. I made a simple dinner and went to bed early, telling myself that tomorrow I'd stick closer to the cabin. I woke sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps on the front porch. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone pacing back and forth across the weathered boards. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lay frozen in bed, straining to listen. The footsteps continued for several minutes, then stopped directly in front of the bedroom window. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing. No sound at all. Then, so softly, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, came a gentle tapping on the glass. 3 soft knocks, like someone asking to be let in. I crept to the window, my bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. The curtains were drawn tight, but I could see the faint outline of someone standing just outside. The figure was perfectly still, and somehow I knew they were looking directly at the window, directly at me, even though they couldn't possibly see through the heavy fabric. The tapping came again. 3 soft knocks. "Who's there?" I whispered, though I doubted my voice carried through the glass. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, waiting. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me pressed against the bedroom wall and the figure motionless outside my window. Eventually, exhaustion won over fear, and I dozed fitfully in the chair by my bed, jolting awake every few minutes to check the window. When dawn finally came, the porch was empty, but in the soft dirt beside the cabin, I found a set of footprints that matched my own hiking boots exactly. The second day, I didn't venture far from the cabin. I told myself I was being practical. I had books to read, work emails to catch up on via the cabin's spotty Wi-Fi, and I needed to plan the rest of my stay. But the truth was that I felt watched. Every time I glanced toward the tree line, I caught fleeting glimpses of movement that vanished when I tried to focus on them. The rational part of my mind offered explanations. Wildlife, wind-blown branches, the natural paranoia that comes with being alone in an unfamiliar place. But rational explanations felt thin and inadequate in the face of what I was experiencing. That afternoon, while sitting on the porch reading, I decided to test my theory. Without looking up from my book, I said aloud, "I know you're there." The words hung in the still air. No response. "You can come out." I'm not afraid. But I was afraid. Terrified, actually. And when I finally raised my head to scan the tree line, I saw her clearly for the first time. She stood between 2 oak trees about 40 yards away, wearing a dark jacket that looked identical to the one hanging in my bedroom closet. Her hair was the same length as mine, the same dark brown color, pulled back in the same messy ponytail I'd worn while hiking yesterday. She was too far away for me to make out her facial features clearly, but her build, her posture, even the way she held her hands at her sides, it was like looking at myself from a distance. But wrong. Subtly, horribly wrong. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge my words. She just watched. And as I stared back, fighting the urge to run inside and lock the door, I realized what made the sight so deeply unsettling. She wasn't breathing. Her chest didn't rise and fall. She stood perfectly, unnaturally still, like a photograph come to life. I blinked, and she was gone. That night, I called my sister Maria from the cabin's landline phone. "Sarah, Jesus, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" I almost told her everything. The figure in the woods, the footprints, the growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'm fine. Just tired. How's Mom?" We talked for 20 minutes about family, work, anything but the woman in the woods who looked like me. When I hung up, I felt more isolated than ever. How do you explain to someone that you think you're being stalked by yourself? I double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked, then built a fire and tried to lose myself in a book. But every few pages I'd catch myself listening for sounds from the porch, for that soft tapping on the bedroom window. The night passed quietly. Too quietly. I realized I hadn't heard any of the usual forest sounds. No owls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, no creaking of tree branches. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Morning brought no relief. As I stood at the kitchen window drinking coffee, I saw her again. This time she was closer, maybe 20 yards from the cabin, standing next to a large maple tree. And this time, I could make out more details. She was wearing my clothes. Not just similar clothes, the exact gray sweater and jeans I'd worn yesterday, down to the small coffee stain on the left sleeve from when I'd been startled by a chipmunk. Her hair was styled the same way, her posture identical to my own. If I hadn't been looking at her from inside the cabin, I would have thought I was looking into a mirror, except for her smile. She was smiling at me, a wide, delighted grin that looked completely wrong on what I was increasingly certain was my own face. I don't smile like that. I've never smiled like that. My smiles are small, cautious things, especially since the divorce. But this thing wearing my body smiled with genuine joy, as if my terror was the most wonderful thing it had ever witnessed. I stumbled backward from the window, knocking over my coffee mug. The hot liquid splashed across my feet, and I yelped in pain and surprise. When I looked back toward the tree, she was gone, but the smile lingered in my mind like an afterimage. I spent the rest of the morning pacing the small cabin, trying to convince myself I was having some kind of breakdown. Stress-induced hallucinations. A psychotic break brought on by the divorce. Maybe I'd been living alone in the woods too long and my mind was creating imaginary companions. But the footprints in the dirt were real. I'd photographed them, measured them against my own boots. They were perfect matches. Around noon, I decided I needed to get out of the cabin. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I was starting to jump at every small sound. I'd drive to the nearest town, have lunch at a restaurant, talk to some real people. Maybe pick up groceries and extend my stay. Prove to myself that I wasn't going to be driven away by my own imagination. I grabbed my purse and car keys and opened the front door. She was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch. Not standing at the tree line this time. Sitting in my chair, wearing my face, smiling that horrible, delighted smile. Up close, I could see that while her features were identical to mine, something was wrong with her skin. It had a waxy, artificial quality, like a masterfully crafted mask. Her eyes didn't blink, and they tracked my movement with the mechanical precision of a camera lens. "Hello, Sarah," she said, and her voice was exactly like mine. Every inflection, every tiny rasp where I damaged my vocal cords screaming at David during our final fight. "I've been waiting for you." I slammed the door and threw the deadbolt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the lock. Through the window, I could see her still sitting in the rocking chair, that terrible smile never wavering. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself. "This isn't happening." But her voice carried clearly through the door. "Of course it's real. I'm real. Just as real as you are." I grabbed the cabin's landline to call for help, but there was no dial tone. The line was dead. My cell phone still showed no service. I was completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a cabin with that thing wearing my face sitting on the porch. "What do you want?" I called through the door. "To talk," she replied. "To understand. It's been so long since I've had a visitor." What are you? A pause. Then, I'm you, Sarah. Or I will be, once you're gone. I ran to the bedroom and pulled the curtains aside to look toward my car. She was standing beside it now, one hand resting on the hood, still smiling. She waggled the fingers of her other hand at me in a cheerful wave. My car keys were still in my hand, but somehow I knew it wouldn't matter. She wouldn't let me leave. Not anymore. The afternoon dragged by in a haze of terror. I found a baseball bat in the closet and gripped it like a lifeline, though I couldn't imagine using it against something that looked exactly like me. Every window I checked showed her in a different location, standing by the car, sitting on the front steps, leaning against a tree. Always watching, always smiling. As the sun began to set, she spoke again from somewhere very close to the bedroom window. I've been alone for so long, Sarah. Do you know what that's like? To be nobody. To have no name, no memories, no purpose except to wait? I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the bat. Stay away from me. I tried that, she continued, her voice conversational, patient. I waited at the edge of the forest, watching the cabin, watching all the people who came and went. But none of them were right. They weren't me. I'm not you, I said. Oh, but you are. You're perfect. The right build, the right coloring, and so wonderfully alone. No one will miss you for weeks. The implication hit me like a physical blow. I thought of my vacation request, my vague explanations to family and coworkers about needing time to figure things out. I'd been careful not to give anyone my exact location. If I disappeared from this cabin, how long would it take for someone to find me? But that's the beauty of it, my voice continued from outside. I won't just take your place temporarily. I'll become you. I'll have your memories, your relationships, your life. And you'll just fade away. I spent the night huddled in the corner of the bedroom, bat across my knees, watching the windows. She didn't try to break in, didn't rattle the doors or tap on the glass, but I could feel her presence, a malevolent weight pressing against the walls of the cabin. Occasionally, I'd hear her voice, sometimes from the porch, sometimes from deeper in the woods. She talked about my life with disturbing accuracy. My childhood, my marriage to David, my job at the insurance company. Details no one else could possibly know. It was as if she was already inside my head, sorting through my memories like files in a cabinet. You were happiest when you were 8, she said at one point, her voice drifting through the bedroom window. Playing in your grandmother's garden. You felt safe there, loved. You haven't felt that way since she died. She was right, completely, horribly right. Dawn brought no relief. When I finally worked up the courage to check the windows, I saw her standing exactly where she'd been the first morning, between the 2 oak trees at the edge of the clearing. But something had changed. She looked more solid somehow, more real. Her skin had lost that waxy, artificial quality, and when she moved, it was with a fluid naturalness that perfectly mimicked my own mannerisms. And I felt different, lighter, like something essential was slowly draining out of me. I stumbled to the bathroom mirror and gasped. My reflection was noticeably paler, my eyes duller. The small scar on my chin from a childhood accident seemed fainter, less distinct. It was as if I was gradually becoming a photocopy of myself, losing definition with each pass through the machine. Do you feel it? Her voice called from outside. The changing. It won't hurt, I promise. It's like falling asleep. I gripped the edges of the sink, staring at my diminishing reflection. Why are you doing this? Because I have to. Because it's what I am. I've been waiting here for so long, Sarah. Decades. Feeding on the occasional hiker, the lost camper. Taking what I need to maintain this form. But it's not enough anymore. I need a complete life. A complete identity. There have to be others, I said desperately. Other people. None like you. None so perfectly suited. None so beautifully alone. I thought of David, of our final fight when he'd accused me of being emotionally unavailable, incapable of genuine connection. Of my parents, who I called dutifully but rarely visited. Of my few remaining friendships, all strained by my increasing isolation since the marriage started falling apart. She was right. I was alone. More alone than I'd ever admitted to myself. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I searched the cabin for anything that might help me understand what I was dealing with. In a drawer beneath some tourist brochures, I found a handful of old newspaper clippings. Missing persons reports dating back to the 1980s. Hikers, campers, people who'd vanished in the Hocking Hills area without a trace. All of them had been alone when they disappeared. The most recent clipping was from 3 months ago. A woman named Jennifer Wells, 32, had been staying in this very cabin when she vanished. The photo showed a brunette with features similar to mine. Not identical, but close enough. Close enough for what? I thought about the thing outside, about how it had looked increasingly real as the hours passed. Was it some kind of shapeshifter? A creature that needed human templates to maintain its form? And once it was done with me, would it move on to find its next victim? The idea filled me with rage as much as fear. How many people had this thing killed? How many lives had it stolen? I found a notebook in the kitchen and began to write, documenting everything that had happened since my arrival. If I didn't survive this, maybe someone would find my account and understand what they were dealing with. Maybe they could put a stop to it. But even as I wrote, I could feel myself fading. My handwriting grew lighter, less distinct. When I tried to remember my mother's maiden name, it took several long seconds to recall it. My own memories were becoming fuzzy around the edges. "It's almost time," the thing outside announced. Her voice was stronger now, more confident. "Can you feel how light you're becoming? How easy it would be to just let go?" I looked at my hands and screamed. They were translucent, like watercolor paintings. I could see the wooden table through my palms. "Don't fight it, Sarah. Fighting only makes it hurt more." But I did fight. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find, then threw open the front door and charged onto the porch. She was standing at the bottom of the steps, no longer bothering to maintain the pretense of distance. Up close, she looked exactly like me, or exactly like I had looked 2 days ago. Her smile was gone, replaced by an expression of mild annoyance. "That won't work," she said, nodding at the knife. "You can't hurt me without hurting yourself." I raised the blade anyway. "Stay back, Sarah." Her voice was patient, almost pitying. "Look at yourself." I glanced down and nearly dropped the knife. My body was fading faster now, becoming transparent. I could see the porch boards through my feet, the railing through my torso. I was disappearing, being erased from existence. "When the process is complete, I'll have everything," she continued. "Your memories, your personality, your life. I'll drive your car back to Cincinnati, return to your job, reconnect with your family. And no one will ever know the difference." "They'll know," I gasped, though I was no longer sure that was true. "Someone will figure it out." "Will they? You've been pulling away from people for months. Your divorce, your isolation, it's the perfect cover. When I return, I'll just be Sarah Rodriguez trying to put her life back together. Maybe I'll be a little different, a little happier. People will say I've grown, that I've found myself during my time away." The knife fell from my nerveless fingers and clattered to the porch floor. I could barely see my own hands now. "Please," I whispered. "I'm not cruel, Sarah. I'll take good care of your life. I'll be better at being you than you ever were." She stepped closer, and I could feel something fundamental being pulled from my chest, my essence drawn into her like water down a drain. The world was growing dim, my vision narrowing to a tunnel focused on her face. My face, perfected and confident in ways I'd never managed. But as the darkness closed in, I remembered something, a detail that had nagged at me since finding those newspaper clippings. Jennifer Wells had vanished 3 months ago, but the thing outside, it had been wearing my form, not hers. What had happened to Jennifer's identity? The realization gave me strength, pulled me back from the edge of nothingness just long enough to understand. This creature didn't just steal identities, it consumed them completely, leaving no trace. Jennifer Wells had been erased so thoroughly that even this entity had forgotten her. But I was still here, Still Sarah Rodriguez, even if I was fading fast. And that meant the process wasn't complete. With the last of my strength, I lunged forward, not at the creature but past her, toward the forest. If I could get away, find help, maybe. She grabbed my arm, her touch burning like ice. No, you don't get to run. Not when we're so close. The contact accelerated the draining. I could feel my memories, my sense of self, flowing into her like blood from an open wound. My childhood, my marriage, my fears and hopes and dreams, all of it pouring into that thing wearing my face, but memories work both ways. As she pulled my experiences into herself, I caught glimpses of hers. Decades of waiting in the forest, feeding on lost souls, growing stronger with each theft. Images of her previous victims, Jennifer Wells, trembling in the same cabin before fading away. A man named Robert Martinez, who'd gone camping alone 5 years ago. A teenage girl who'd run away from home and made the mistake of seeking shelter in these woods. So many victims, so many stolen lives, and underneath it all, an ancient hunger, a void that could never be truly filled. She wasn't just taking my identity, she was trying to use it to become real, to transform from a parasitic echo into an actual person. But it never worked. Not completely. She could wear the stolen faces, access the stolen memories, but some essential spark always eluded her. And so she'd hunt again and again, trapped in an endless cycle of theft and disappointment. The knowledge gave me one last desperate idea. Instead of fighting the drain, I embraced it. I pushed my memories toward her as hard as I could, flooding her with everything I'd experienced, everything I was. My pain over the divorce, my loneliness, my self-doubt, but also my love for my family, my pride in my work, my determination to rebuild my life. She gasped, stumbling backward. "What are you doing?" I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. Giving you what you want. The flood of memories continued, but now I was directing it. I showed her my grandmother's garden, the safety and love I'd felt there. I showed her my wedding day, the hope I'd carried despite my fears. I showed her Maria's laugh, my mother's worried phone calls, all the connections that bound me to the world even when I felt most alone. "Stop," she whispered, her perfect features twisting in confusion. This isn't how it works." But it was working, just not the way she'd intended. My memories weren't just filling her, they were changing her. I could see it in her expression, feel it in the lessening grip of her hand. For the first time in her existence, she was experiencing genuine human emotion. Love, regret, hope, pain. All of it crashing through her stolen consciousness like a tsunami. She released my arm and staggered backward, clutching her head. "Make it stop. I don't want this. I don't want to feel—" "You can't have my life without my pain," I told her, my voice growing stronger even as my body remained translucent. "They're inseparable. That's what makes us human." The creature that had worn my face began to change. Her features shifted, becoming less defined, more fluid. The borrowed flesh rippled like water, unable to maintain its stolen form under the assault of genuine human experience. She screamed, not with my voice anymore, but with something older and more primal. "You're destroying me," she gasped. "No," I said, feeling my memories, my sense of self, flowing back into my fading form. "I'm saving you. I'm giving you the chance to be real." The change accelerated. Her stolen features dissolved completely, revealing something altogether different beneath. Not human, but not entirely alien either. Ancient and hungry, yes, but also desperately, achingly lonely. A thing that had been mimicking humanity for so long that it had forgotten its own nature. As my memories settled back into place, I understood. She hadn't been hunting victims. She'd been hunting teachers. Each stolen life was an attempt to learn what it meant to be real, to be connected to something larger than herself. But you can't learn love through theft. Can't understand connection through isolation. The creature collapsed to her knees, her form continuing to shift and blur. "I don't know what I am anymore." I looked down at my hands and saw they were solid again, fully real. The draining had reversed, pulling my essence back from the brink of dissolution. But I was changed too. The creature's loneliness had touched something deep inside me, a recognition of my own isolation and hunger for connection. "You're yourself," I told her, maybe for the first time. She looked up at me with eyes that were no longer stolen, no longer artificial. They were her own eyes, ancient and sad and strangely beautiful. "But I don't know who that is." "Then figure it out, but not through theft. Not anymore." We stared at each other for a long moment. Predator and prey transformed into something else entirely. Then she nodded and rose to her feet. Her form had stabilized into something vaguely humanoid but clearly not human. Tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shift between shadow and moonlight. "Will you stay?" she asked. "No," I said. "This place isn't good for either of us. But I won't report what happened here, won't bring hunters or scientists. You deserve the chance to find your own way." She nodded again, understanding. "And you deserve the chance to find yours." I packed quickly, throwing my belongings into the car without ceremony. As I drove away from the cabin, I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing at the edge of the clearing. She raised one hand in farewell, and I found myself waving back. The drive home took 6 hours. I spent most of it thinking about what I'd learned, about the connections that bound us to life even when we felt most alone. By the time I reached Cincinnati, I knew what I had to do. I called Maria first, then my parents, made plans to visit, to rebuild the relationships I'd let atrophy. I started therapy, began the hard work of understanding why I'd isolated myself so completely. And, slowly, carefully, I began to open my life to other people again. It's been 3 years since Hocking Hills. I'm remarried now, to a kind man named Thomas who doesn't mind when I wake up screaming from nightmares I can't fully explain. We're expecting our first child this spring, but sometimes, late at night, I wonder about her. The creature in the woods who tried to steal my life and ended up learning what it meant to be alive. I hope she found her way, whatever that means for something like her. I hope she learned that connection isn't theft, that love can't be taken, only given freely. And sometimes, when the loneliness threatens to overwhelm me again, I remember her ancient eyes and the desperate hunger I saw there. It reminds me that we're all searching for the same thing in the end: to be real, to be known, to matter to someone else. The difference is in how we go about finding it. I never went back to Hocking Hills, never had any desire to return to those ancient woods. But recently, I've started having dreams about the place. Not nightmares, just quiet, peaceful dreams where I walk the forest paths and feel a presence watching me from the trees. Not threatening anymore, just aware, connected. In the dreams, I always wave, and something waves back. Maybe that's her way of letting me know she's still there, still learning, still growing into whatever she's meant to become. And maybe it's my way of telling her that she's not alone in the world anymore. None of us are, if we're brave enough to reach out. But sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Hocking Hills. Not the creature, something else, something harder to name. A deeper understanding of the connections that bind us all. The threads of empathy and recognition that make us human. If that's what followed me home, I'm grateful for it. Even if it wakes me up at night sometimes, reminding me of truths I'd rather forget. Some things in the woods aren't meant to be found, but others are meant to find you. The trick is knowing the difference, and learning to live with both. I never believed in the stories they told about Ocala National Forest until what happened to me out there. My name is Lily Foster, I'm 29 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. I should have known something was wrong when I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from the moment I pulled my Winnebago into the remote campsite off Forest Road 88. The site sat in a natural clearing, surrounded by towering slash pines and dense palmetto scrub that seemed to press in closer as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Spanish moss hung like funeral shrouds from the ancient oaks, swaying in the humid September breeze that carried the musty scent of decaying vegetation and something else. Something sour and organic that I couldn't identify. I'd been planning this solo RV trip for months, desperate to escape the suffocating memories that had been haunting me since Sarah's death. My twin sister had drowned exactly 1 year ago, and I couldn't bear spending the anniversary in our shared apartment, surrounded by her things, her absence echoing in every corner. The forest seemed like the perfect place to find some peace, to maybe start healing. How wrong I was. The first sign that something was amiss came when I was setting up my campsite. I'd parked the RV facing east toward the narrow dirt road that led back to the main forest highway. As I was connecting the electrical hookup, I glanced up and saw a woman standing about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a massive live oak draped in moss. She wore jeans and a red flannel shirt, the exact outfit I had on. When I blinked and looked again, she was gone. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the electrical connection. It had to be a trick of the light, a combination of exhaustion and grief playing with my mind. I'd been seeing things that weren't there for months now. Glimpses of Sarah in crowds, her voice calling my name from empty rooms. My therapist said it was normal, part of the grieving process. But this felt different. This felt real. I shook it off and finished setting up camp. The RV's generator hummed to life, its mechanical drone oddly comforting against the wilderness silence. I pulled out my camping chair and cracked open a beer, determined to enjoy the solitude I'd driven 6 hours from Tampa to find. The sun was setting, painting the canopy above in brilliant oranges and purples, and for a moment I almost felt peaceful. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. Somewhere in the darkness beyond my small circle of light, someone was crying. Soft, muffled sobs that rose and fell with an eerie rhythm. I stood up so quickly that my chair toppled over, beer splashing across my boots. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone out there? Do you need help?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete that even the insects seemed to have gone mute. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the tree line, the beam catching nothing but gnarled bark and dancing shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs as I waited, listening. Nothing. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me and pulling the curtains shut. The familiar smell of the vehicle, a mixture of pine air freshener and the faint mustiness of old upholstery, should have been comforting, but instead it felt like I was trapped in a metal coffin. I tried to convince myself that the crying had been an animal, maybe a bobcat or a coyote. The forest was full of creatures that could make human-like sounds when they wanted to, but deep down, I knew better. That crying had been human, female, and it had sounded exactly like Sarah. I barely slept that first night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that desperate weeping echoing through my dreams, and I kept jerking awake with the unsettling sensation that someone was watching me. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and made coffee. Sitting at the small dinette table and staring out the window at the impenetrable darkness beyond the glass. That's when I saw her again. She stood at the very edge of my vision, just where the RV's exterior lights faded into shadow. This time I had a clear view of her face and my coffee mug slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor. It was me, exactly me, down to the scar on my chin from a childhood accident and the silver studs in my ears. But her expression was wrong. A blank, empty stare that sent ice through my veins. She stood perfectly still for what felt like hours, watching me through the window, and when I blinked, she was gone. The next morning brought a bright Florida sun that should have banished my fears, but the terror from the night before clung to me like spider webs. I cleaned up the broken coffee mug with shaking hands, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Stress could cause hallucinations. Grief could make you see things that weren't there. I was still processing Sarah's death, still dealing with survivor's guilt and the crushing loneliness that came with losing the person who'd shared my DNA, my childhood, my entire life, until that horrible day at the lake. I decided to take a hike to clear my head. The Ocala National Forest had dozens of trails, and I'd brought my GPS and plenty of water. Movement would help, I told myself. Fresh air and exercise would chase away the shadows that seemed to be following me. The Florida trail marker stood about a quarter-mile from my campsite, and I set off down the sandy path with my backpack and hiking boots, determined to put some distance between myself and the oppressive atmosphere of the campground. The trail wound through typical Central Florida wilderness: longleaf pines, turkey oaks, and dense patches of saw palmetto that scratched at my legs despite my long pants. Armadillos rustled in the underbrush, and I caught glimpses of deer bounding away through the trees. For the first hour, I almost managed to relax. The rhythmic crunch of sand under my boots and the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy worked like meditation, and I began to think that maybe this trip would help after all. Maybe I could find some peace in the wilderness, away from the constant reminders of my loss. Then my GPS started acting up. I'd been hiking for about 2 hours when I stopped to check my position and realized the device was showing impossible readings. According to the screen, I was somehow moving in a perfect circle, despite the fact that I'd been following a straight trail the entire time. The trail markers I'd passed were all accounted for on my map, but the GPS insisted I was back where I'd started. I turned around intending to retrace my steps, but the trail behind me looked different. The familiar white blazes were still there, painted on trees and posts, but the landscape had changed. The longleaf pines were taller, more densely packed, and the path seemed narrower, overgrown with vegetation that hadn't been there before. My breathing became shallow as panic began to set in. I'd been hiking for years, had never gotten lost, always trusted my sense of direction. But now, nothing looked familiar. Even the sun seemed to be in the wrong position, casting shadows that didn't make sense for the time of day. I pulled out my phone, hoping for a signal, but the screen showed no service. Worse, the compass app was spinning wildly, unable to lock onto magnetic north. Every direction looked the same, an endless maze of pine trees and palmetto scrub stretching away into green shadows. That's when I heard my name being called. Lily. Lily, where are you? The voice drifted through the trees from somewhere ahead, faint but unmistakably familiar. It was my voice, but with a quality I'd never heard before. A hollow, echoing tone that seemed to come from very far away. Lily, I'm lost. I can't find my way back. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the humid heat. I stood frozen on the trail, afraid to move in any direction, afraid to answer the voice that sounded like my own. The calling continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always with that same plaintive, desperate quality that made my teeth ache. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear and confusion, but eventually the sun began to sink lower in the sky, and I realized I had to make a choice: stay put and risk being caught in the forest after dark, or follow one of the trails and hope it led back to civilization. I chose to move, following the white blazes deeper into the forest and trying to ignore the voice that continued to call my name from the shadows. The trail seemed to stretch on forever, winding through terrain that grew increasingly alien and hostile. The trees pressed closer together, their branches forming a canopy so dense that very little sunlight reached the forest floor. The air grew thick and humid, heavy with the smell of rotting vegetation and something else, a metallic scent that reminded me of blood. As darkness began to fall, I finally stumbled into a clearing I didn't recognize. In the center stood what looked like an old ranger station, its weathered wood siding and rusty metal roof barely visible in the gloom. No lights showed in the windows, and Spanish moss hung from the eaves like tattered curtains. I approached cautiously, my flashlight beam dancing across the building's facade. A sign hung crooked by the door: Ocala National Forest, Ranger Station 17. But that was impossible. I'd studied the forest maps extensively before my trip, and there was no Ranger Station 17. The highest numbered station in this section of the forest was 12. The door stood slightly ajar, creaking softly in the night breeze. Against every instinct I had, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The beam of my flashlight revealed a single room filled with dusty furniture and outdated equipment. A desk sat in one corner, covered with yellowed papers and an old rotary telephone. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their metal surfaces spotted with rust. And everywhere, on every surface, covering the walls, scattered across the floor, were photographs. Hundreds of them. All black and white, all showing the same subject. Me. I stared in horror at image after image of myself in the forest, caught in various poses and locations. Some showed me hiking on trails I'd never walked. Others captured me sitting by campfires I'd never built. In a few, I appeared to be sleeping in places I'd never been. And in all of them, my expression was blank, emotionless, like a sleepwalker or someone under hypnosis. My hands shook as I picked up one of the photographs from the desk. It showed me standing in this very room looking directly at the camera with those same empty eyes. But I'd never been here before. I was seeing this place for the first time. The date stamped on the back of the photo was from yesterday. I dropped the picture and backed toward the door, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Photos didn't develop themselves, didn't show events that hadn't occurred. But the evidence was all around me, undeniable in its horrible impossibility. That's when I heard footsteps on the porch outside. Slow, deliberate steps that grew closer with each passing second. I killed my flashlight and crouched behind the desk, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard for miles. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and I held my breath, praying whoever it was would move on. The door creaked open wider. Lily. The voice was mine again, but closer now, right there in the room with me. I know you're here, Lily. I've been looking for you. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to make myself smaller, tried to become invisible. The floorboards groaned under slow, careful footsteps as my doppelganger moved through the room, and I could hear her breathing. The same rhythm as my own, but somehow wrong, like air being forced through damaged lungs. We need to go home now, Lily. Sarah's waiting. My eyes snapped open at the mention of my dead sister's name. Through the gap under the desk, I could see a pair of hiking boots that were identical to the ones I was wearing. The same boots, down to the red laces and the scuff mark on the left toe from a stumble I'd taken 2 weeks ago. She misses you, the other me continued in that hollow, echoing voice. She's been waiting by the lake for so long. It's time to join her. The boots moved closer, and I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. I could taste blood, metallic and warm, as terror threatened to overwhelm my ability to think. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. People didn't have conversations with identical versions of themselves in abandoned buildings that shouldn't exist. But the boots were real. The voice was real. And when I looked up through my lashes, I could see her legs, my legs, clad in the same jeans I was wearing, complete with the small tear near the right knee. She forgives you, the thing that looked like me whispered, and I could hear her leaning down, getting closer. For not being there, for not drowning with her. She forgives you, and now you can be together. I couldn't take it anymore. With a desperate scream, I burst from my hiding place and ran for the door, shoving past the figure that felt solid and real and horribly cold. I heard her laugh behind me, my laugh, but wrong, distorted, as I crashed through the door and stumbled into the night. I ran blindly through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and face, my flashlight beam swinging wildly as I crashed through undergrowth and leaped over fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear pursuit. Not the sound of running feet, but something worse. A rustling, sliding noise, as if something was moving through the trees without touching the ground. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I saw a light ahead through the trees and realized with overwhelming relief that I'd somehow found my way back to my RV. The generator was still humming, the exterior lights still burning, exactly as I'd left them hours ago. I sprinted across the clearing and threw myself through the door, slamming it shut and turning every lock I could find. Only then did I allow myself to collapse onto the dinette bench, sobbing with relief and terror. I was safe. I was back. Whatever had happened in the forest, hallucination, breakdown, or something worse, it was over. But as I sat there catching my breath, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. My hiking boots were sitting neatly by the door, clean and dry. I looked down at my feet. I was wearing sneakers. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. According to the display, I'd been gone for less than 30 minutes, but I knew I'd been hiking for hours, had been lost in the forest as darkness fell, had spent time in that impossible ranger station surrounded by photographs of myself. The photos. With shaking hands, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the photograph I'd grabbed from the desk. It was still there, still impossible, still showing me in a place I'd never been with an expression I'd never worn. The date stamp on the back confirmed it had been taken yesterday, but I'd only arrived at the campsite this afternoon. I stared at the image until my eyes watered, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman in the photograph looked exactly like me, but there was something fundamentally wrong with her posture, her expression, the way she held her head. She looked like a puppet, a hollow imitation of a human being. That's when I realized she was still out there. I could feel her presence in the darkness beyond the RV's thin aluminum walls. She was watching, waiting, patient as only the dead could be. And I understood, with horrible clarity, that she wasn't going to leave. She would wait for me to sleep, to let my guard down, and then she would find a way inside. The next few hours passed in a nightmare of vigilance and terror. I kept every light on, checked and rechecked the locks, and watched the windows for any sign of movement. Around midnight, I saw her again, standing just outside the circle of light cast by the exterior lamps, perfectly still, watching me with those empty eyes. I tried starting the RV to leave, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The battery was dead, the radio silent, and my cell phone had no signal despite showing full bars earlier. I was trapped, alone in the forest with something that wore my face and knew my name, and spoke of my dead sister with intimate knowledge that no one else possessed. As dawn approached, I must have dozed off despite my terror, because I jerked awake to find myself sitting at the dinette table with a pen in my hand. Spread before me were pages of my own handwriting, neat script that I didn't remember producing. The pages contained detailed descriptions of Sarah's drowning, but from a perspective I'd never had. They described watching from below the surface as my sister struggled and went under, described the feeling of water filling her lungs and the gradual fading of consciousness. They were written in first person, as if I had been the one drowning, as if I had experienced my sister's death firsthand. At the bottom of the last page, in handwriting that became increasingly erratic, "She's waiting by the lake. Come home, Lily. Come home and join us." I tore the pages into pieces and flushed them down the RV's tiny toilet, but I couldn't flush away the memory of writing them or the horrible knowledge they contained. Someone, something, had used my hand to write my sister's final moments, and I hadn't even been aware of it happening. The sound of the generator cutting off broke the morning silence like a gunshot. I rushed to check the fuel gauge, but it showed 3/4 full. The engine wasn't overheated, the connections were secure, and there was no mechanical reason for it to stop. I tried to restart it, but it wouldn't catch, leaving me without electricity in the growing heat of the Florida morning. That's when I noticed the marks. Scored into the metal siding of the RV, all around the windows and door, were symbols I'd never seen before. Crude, angular marks that looked like they'd been carved with fingernails or sharp stones. They formed patterns that hurt to look at directly, designs that seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't focusing on them completely. The marks were fresh, the metal bright where something had scraped away the paint and finish. Whatever had made them had been here recently, circling my RV while I slept, marking it like a predator marking territory. I grabbed my day pack and what little water I had left, determined to hike out to the main road and flag down help. The RV was compromised, the generator was dead, and I couldn't spend another night in this place. Every instinct I had screamed that something terrible was going to happen if I stayed. The trail back to Forest Road 88 should have been simple, a straight shot through less than a mile of pine forest. But as I walked, I began to notice that the landmarks weren't where they should be. The distinctive lightning-struck oak that marked the halfway point was gone, replaced by a cluster of younger trees that shouldn't have existed. The small bridge over a seasonal creek had vanished entirely, and the creek itself seemed to have changed course. Worse, I kept finding evidence of my own passage, footprints in the sandy soil that matched my boots exactly but pointing in the wrong direction. broken branches at head height where someone my size had pushed through dense vegetation, a crumpled energy bar wrapper that I recognized as my own, even though I hadn't eaten anything since yesterday. The trail markers were all wrong too. Instead of the standard white blazes I expected, I found red marks painted on trees and posts. Not painted, carved. Deep gouges in the bark that wept sap like wounds, forming symbols that matched the ones I'd found on my RV. I was so focused on the trail markers that I almost walked into her. She was standing in the middle of the path about 20 yards ahead, perfectly still, facing away from me. Same red flannel shirt, same jeans, same dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe it was another hiker, someone who could help me find my way back to civilization. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice cracking with dehydration. "Are you okay? Do you know the way back to the parking area?" She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. I took a few steps closer and realized she was standing in an odd position, tilted slightly forward as if she was about to fall, but somehow frozen in place. "Miss, are you hurt?" Still no response. I moved closer, close enough to see that her skin had a waxy, unnatural pallor, and that her hands hung at her sides in a way that suggested broken bones. Close enough to smell the sickly sweet scent of decay that clung to her like perfume. "Sarah?" I whispered, because even though I knew it was impossible, even though Sarah was dead and buried, there was something about the woman's stance and posture that reminded me of my sister. The figure began to turn around, slowly, mechanically, and I caught a glimpse of her profile. My profile, but wrong in some fundamental way. The proportions were slightly off, as if someone had tried to recreate my face from memory and gotten the details just slightly incorrect. I didn't wait to see her full face. I turned and ran back the way I'd come, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs in my desperation to get away. Behind me, I could hear that horrible sliding, rustling sound again, and I knew she was following, pursuing me through the forest with inhuman persistence. When I finally stopped running, gasping for breath and looking around wildly for landmarks, I realized I was completely lost. The forest stretched in all directions, an endless maze of pine and palmetto and Spanish moss that all looked exactly the same. The sun was overhead, offering no clue to direction, and my phone's compass was still spinning uselessly. That's when I saw the lake. It appeared through the trees like a mirage, a perfect circle of dark water surrounded by cypress trees draped in moss. The surface was so still it looked like black glass, reflecting the clouded sky with supernatural clarity. And there, sitting on a fallen log at the water's edge, was Sarah. Not the thing that had been pursuing me through the forest, but my sister as she'd been in life, young, vibrant, smiling the crooked smile that had been her trademark since childhood. She wore the blue sundress she'd died in, the one they'd buried her in, and her dark hair fell around her shoulders in waves that caught the filtered sunlight. "Lily," she said, and her voice was exactly as I remembered it, warm and familiar and full of love. "I've been waiting for you." I stumbled toward her, tears streaming down my face, all rational thought abandoned in the face of seeing my sister alive again. She looked perfect, unmarked by death or drowning, and when she stood and opened her arms to me, I fell into her embrace like I had so many times in childhood when nightmares or scraped knees had sent me running to her for comfort. She felt real, solid and warm and alive, smelling faintly of the vanilla perfume she'd always worn. For a moment, the terror and confusion of the past 2 days melted away, replaced by overwhelming relief and joy. My sister was here. Somehow, impossibly, Sarah was here, and everything was going to be okay. "I knew you'd come," she whispered against my hair. "I knew you'd find me eventually." "How is this possible?" I sobbed, pulling back to look at her face, to memorize every beloved detail. "You drowned, Sarah. You've been dead for a year." She smiled that crooked smile and brushed tears from my cheeks with gentle fingers. "Death isn't the end, Lily. Not when love is strong enough. I've been waiting here for you, in this place between places, knowing you'd eventually follow. I don't understand." "You've been calling to me," she said, Her eyes, exactly my eyes, the eyes we'd shared since birth, reflecting the dark water behind me. Every night for a year, crying yourself to sleep, wishing you could join me. Wishing you'd been the one who drowned instead of me. Your grief opened a door, Lily. It brought you here, to this place where I've been waiting. I looked around at the lake, at the impossible perfection of this hidden place, and began to understand. This wasn't really the forest. This was somewhere else, somewhere in between life and death where lost souls gathered and waited for the people they'd left behind. The other me, I said. The one in the forest. What is that? Sarah's expression grew sad. That's what I had to become to bring you here. A reflection, a copy, something that could exist in your world long enough to guide you to mine. She served her purpose, but now she's not needed anymore. Now there's just us. She took my hand and led me toward the water's edge. The lake stretched out before us, dark and inviting, and I could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Pale forms that might have been fish or might have been something else entirely. All you have to do is step into the water, Sarah said softly, just like I did. It's not painful, Lily. It's like going to sleep, like slipping into a warm bath. And then we'll be together forever, the way we were always meant to be. Part of me wanted nothing more than to follow her into that dark water, to end the year of grief and guilt that had been eating me alive since the day she drowned. Sarah was here, alive and perfect and offering me everything I'd dreamed of during those long, lonely nights when the weight of her absence threatened to crush me. But as I stood there on the muddy shore, looking into water so dark I couldn't see the bottom, something inside me rebelled. This wasn't right. This wasn't Sarah, no matter how perfectly she'd been recreated. My sister would never ask me to die for her, would never use my grief and love to lure me into whatever lay beneath the surface of this impossible lake. You're not her, I whispered, pulling my hand free from her grip. You're something else, something that's been feeding on my grief and using my memories to create this illusion. The thing that looked like Sarah frowned, and for just a moment I caught a glimpse of something else underneath the familiar features, something ancient and hungry and utterly alien. Then the mask slipped back into place, and she was my sister again, hurt and confused. Lily, it's me. I know it's hard to believe, but no. I backed away from the water's edge, away from the thing wearing my sister's face. Sarah would want me to live. She'd want me to find a way to be happy again, not throw my life away chasing after ghosts. The creature's expression hardened, and when she spoke, her voice carried an echo of that hollow, emotionless tone I'd heard in the forest. You came here, Lily. You opened the door with your grief and your guilt and your desperate need to see me again. You can't just walk away now. Watch me. I turned and ran, crashing through the cypress trees and Spanish moss, leaving the lake and the thing that wasn't my sister behind. I could hear it calling after me, its voice shifting between Sarah's warm tones and something altogether more disturbing. But I didn't look back. The forest seemed to fight me as I ran, branches catching at my clothes and roots rising up to trip me. More than once I found myself face to face with my doppelganger, standing motionless on the trail ahead with those empty eyes and that terrible, knowing smile. But each time I changed direction, found another path, refused to let fear or despair stop me from moving forward. I don't know how long I ran or how many false trails I followed, but eventually I burst through a line of trees and found myself back at my campsite. The RV sat exactly where I'd left it, and in the harsh afternoon sunlight, the strange symbols carved into its siding looked less threatening, more like random scratches made by animals or falling branches. I climbed inside and grabbed my keys, not caring whether the engine would start or whether I had enough fuel to reach civilization. All that mattered was getting away from this place, away from the things that wore familiar faces and spoke with beloved voices, but carried nothing but hunger and malevolence beneath their borrowed skins. To my amazement, the RV started on the first try. I threw it into gear and tore out of the campsite, gravel spraying behind me as I raced down the narrow forest road toward the highway. In my rearview mirror, I could see figures standing at the edge of the clearing, multiple versions of myself, all watching with those same empty expressions as I fled. I drove straight through to Tampa, stopping only for gas and never looking back. I told myself it had all been a hallucination, a complete mental breakdown brought on by grief and isolation. The photographs I thought I'd found didn't exist. When I checked my jacket pocket, it was empty. The writing I'd done in my sleep was gone, flushed away and forgotten. The mysterious lake and the thing that looked like Sarah were just products of a mind pushed beyond its breaking point. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Shapes that look familiar, faces in windows that shouldn't be there. And sometimes, when I'm standing in front of the bathroom mirror brushing my teeth or washing my face, I see her behind me, the other me, the one with empty eyes and that terrible, knowing smile. She's waiting, I think, waiting for me to lower my guard, to let grief and loneliness overwhelm my defenses again. Waiting for me to open that door and invite her back into my world. And the worst part is, on the really bad nights when the weight of Sarah's absence crushes down on me like a physical thing, I find myself wanting to let her in. Because even a hollow imitation of my sister is better than nothing at all. But I resist. I have to. Because I know now that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And whatever lives in the spaces between life and death, in the dark waters of impossible lakes hidden deep in haunted forests, is always hungry for more. I moved to a different city last month, changed my phone number, even dyed my hair a different color. But she follows me everywhere I go. I see her in crowds sometimes, standing perfectly still while people flow around her like water around a stone. She's in reflections that don't quite match my movements, in photographs where I appear twice, once normal and once with those empty, endless eyes. The grief counselor I've been seeing says I'm making progress, that the episodes are becoming less frequent. She thinks I'm healing from Sarah's death, learning to accept the reality of loss and move forward with my life. She doesn't know about the camping trip, about what I saw in Ocala National Forest. I tried to tell her once, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain that you met yourself in the woods, that you were offered the chance to die and chose to live instead? Some nights I dream about the lake. I stand on its shores and watch shapes moving beneath the dark surface, and I know that one of them is Sarah, the real Sarah, trapped in that place between worlds, waiting for someone to join her in whatever existence she's found beyond death. Those dreams feel more real than waking life sometimes, and I wake up with the taste of lake water in my mouth and mud under my fingernails. I know she's still out there, my other self, growing stronger every time I let my guard down. She's learning, adapting, becoming more convincing in her mimicry of human behavior. And one day, when I'm at my weakest and most vulnerable, she'll make her move. She'll find a way to take my place in the world, and I'll be the one standing in the shadows with empty eyes and a hollow smile, waiting for the next grieving soul to lure into the darkness. The only thing that keeps me going is the knowledge that Sarah, the real Sarah, wouldn't want this for me. She'd want me to live, to find happiness again, to honor her memory by making the most of the life I still have. So I keep fighting, keep resisting the pull of that dark water and the promises whispered in my own voice, but I'm tired, so very tired. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn when sleep won't come and the weight of existence feels unbearable, I find myself wondering if it would really be so terrible to let her win, to step aside and let something else take over the burden of being alive. I tell myself these are just thoughts, just the natural response to prolonged grief and trauma. But I know better. I know that every time I entertain these ideas, every time I let despair gain ground in my heart, I'm opening that door a little wider. I'm making it easier for the thing that wears my face to cross over from whatever realm it inhabits and claim the life it believes should be its own. The mirror in my bathroom has started showing two reflections again. Most of the time, they move in sync, perfect copies performing the same actions. But, occasionally, just for a split second, one of them will pause, will turn its head slightly and look directly at me with those empty, hungry eyes. She's getting stronger, more real, and I don't know how much longer I can keep her at bay. If you're reading this, If something happens to me and they find these words, know that I fought as hard as I could. Know that whatever takes my place afterward isn't really me, no matter how perfectly it mimics my voice and mannerisms. The real Lily Foster died a little bit every day for a year after losing her sister, and what remains is just the echo of a person, the ghost of someone who once knew how to live. Don't trust the woman who looks like me but smiles with too many teeth. Don't believe the stories she tells about camping trips and forest rangers and photographs that show impossible things. And whatever you do, don't follow her into the woods. Because once you open that door, once you let grief and loneliness guide your steps into that place where lost souls gather and hunger, you'll never find your way back to the world you knew. The lake is always calling. The dark water never stops whispering promises of reunion and peace. And somewhere in its depths, surrounded by cypress trees that have never known sunlight, the things we've lost are waiting for us to join them in whatever existence lies beyond the boundary between life and death. I hear her now, moving through my apartment in the next room. The sound of footsteps that match my own. The creak of floorboards under familiar weight. She's done waiting in the shadows. She's come to claim what she believes is rightfully hers. The woman in the mirror has stopped pretending to be a reflection. She's stepping out of the glass, reaching toward me with hands that are identical to mine but feel like ice when they brush against my skin. Her smile is my smile, but beneath it lies a hunger that no human emotion could ever satisfy. She whispers my name, our name, and her voice is exactly like mine except for the echoing quality that suggests vast, empty spaces. She tells me it's time to rest, time to let her take over the exhausting business of being alive. She promises it won't hurt, that I'll simply fade away like mist in the morning sun, leaving her to live the life I've been too damaged to properly appreciate. Part of me wants to let it happen, the tired part, the part that's been carrying the weight of grief and survivor's guilt for so long that it's forgotten what it feels like to be whole. But somewhere deep inside, in the place where Sarah's memory lives untainted by whatever darkness has been pursuing me, I find the strength to fight one more time. I won't let her have my life. I won't let her wear my face and fool the people who care about me into believing she's the real thing. Whatever it costs, whatever price I have to pay, I'll find a way to close the door I accidentally opened in that forest. In that moment of despair when I wished more than anything to trade places with my dead sister. The lake is calling, but I'm not listening anymore. The dark water whispers promises of reunion and peace, but I know now that what waits beneath its surface isn't rest. It's an eternity of hunger, an endless need that can never be satisfied. Sarah isn't there, waiting for me with open arms and that crooked smile I remember so well. Sarah is at peace, wherever the dead go when they leave this world behind. What haunts the spaces between life and death, what feeds on grief and mimics love, isn't my sister. It's something far older and more terrible, something that has learned to wear familiar faces and speak with beloved voices in order to lure the living into its embrace. But I see it now for what it really is, and I'll die before I let it take my place in the world. The woman who looks exactly like me is reaching out, and her touch burns like ice, but I'm ready for her now. I know what I have to do. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Moab. I'm Sarah, and I was 34 when I learned that some things in the desert aren't meant to be found. Michael had been planning our RV trip to Utah for months. He'd bought the used Winnebago from a dealer in Phoenix, spent weeks fixing the generator and patching the roof, talking endlessly about Red Rock canyons and starlit nights away from civilization. I loved watching him work on it in our driveway, grease on his hands, that focused expression he got when solving problems. After 2 years of marriage, these were the moments I treasured most. Michael completely absorbed in making something perfect for us. "We'll find a spot way out on BLM land," he'd say, referring to the Bureau of Land Management areas where RVs could camp for free. No cell service, no neighbors, just us in the desert. The idea thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. Since my mother's death 6 months earlier, I'd been struggling with anxiety, seeing shadows where there shouldn't be any, hearing footsteps in empty rooms. The therapist said grief could manifest in unusual ways, that isolation might not be the best idea for my current mental state. But Michael was so excited, and I didn't want to disappoint him. I thought maybe the vast openness of the desert would be healing. I was wrong. We left Phoenix on a Thursday morning in October, the Winnebago loaded with enough food and water for a week. The GPS guided us north through Flagstaff and into Utah, the landscape gradually shifting from desert scrub to towering red sandstone formations. Moab appeared like an oasis, a small tourist town nestled between impossible cliffs and mesas that seemed to glow from within. "Look at that," Michael breathed, pulling into a gas station. The La Salle Mountains rose to the east, snow-capped peaks contrasting sharply with the red desert. "We're going to have an incredible time." I forced a smile, though something about the landscape felt overwhelming. The formations were too large, too alien, like we'd driven onto another planet. The rocks seemed to watch us, their weathered faces holding secrets I didn't want to know. After stocking up on ice and last-minute supplies, Michael consulted the map he'd printed from some RV camping website. Cell service was already spotty in town. "There's a spot about 15 miles north," he said, tracing a thin line on the paper. "Remote, but accessible." Perfect. The road out of Moab was paved for the first few miles, then turned to well-maintained dirt, then to barely visible tracks winding between massive rock formations. Our GPS lost signal completely around mile 10. Michael didn't seem concerned. "We've got the map," he said, though I noticed him glancing at the blank screen more frequently. And I marked the turn-off coordinates. The landscape grew increasingly surreal as we drove deeper into the desert. Towering red spires rose like ancient cathedrals, their surfaces carved by millions of years of wind and water into impossible shapes. Shadows pooled in canyons and crevices, some so dark they seemed to absorb light entirely. I found myself staring into those shadows, my mind playing tricks, occasionally catching glimpses of movement that vanished when I looked directly. "There," Michael said, turning onto an even fainter track that wound between two massive stone pillars. "This should take us to the campsite." The track climbed gradually, switchbacking through a narrow canyon. Red walls rose on both sides, so close I could reach out and touch them. The RV's engine labored in the thin air, and I could hear rocks pinging off the undercarriage. Then suddenly we emerged onto a flat area perhaps 200 yards across, completely enclosed by towering sandstone walls. "Holy shit," Michael whispered. It was beautiful and terrible. The campsite sat in a natural amphitheater carved from living rock, the walls soaring 300 feet above us in every direction. There was only one way in or out, the narrow track we'd followed. Ancient petroglyphs covered portions of the rock face, spiral patterns and human figures that seemed to shift in the changing light. A few stunted juniper trees provided minimal shade near what had clearly been previous campsites. Fire rings made from stacked stones, worn areas where tents had been pitched. "It's perfect," Michael said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Completely private." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The place was stunning, but something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, too heavy. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even our voices seemed muffled, as if the rock walls were absorbing sound. Michael chose a level spot near the center of the amphitheater, and we spent the next hour setting up camp. He ran the generator to check the RV's systems while I arranged our camp chairs and started a fire in one of the existing stone rings. As the sun began to set, the rock walls came alive with color. Deep reds shifting to purple, then to black as shadows crept across the stone. "Want a beer?" Michael asked, emerging from the RV with 2 bottles. We sat by the fire, watching stars appear in the narrow strip of sky above us. The Milky Way was more vivid than I'd ever seen it, a river of light flowing between the canyon walls, but the beauty couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Michael," I said quietly, "do you feel like we're alone here?" He glanced around the amphitheater, then back at me. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It's probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I could feel eyes on us, a prickling sensation between my shoulder blades. Several times I'd turned quickly, certain I'd seen movement at the edges of my vision, but there was never anything there. That first night, I lay awake listening to the absolute silence outside our RV. Michael slept soundly beside me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just outside, watching our windows. Twice I thought I heard footsteps on gravel, soft and careful, circling the RV. But when I looked out the windows, I saw nothing but darkness. I must have dozed eventually because I woke to Michael shaking my shoulder gently. "Sarah, you need to see this." Dawn was breaking above the canyon walls, painting the rock faces gold and rose. I followed Michael outside, expecting to see wildlife or some spectacular sunrise effect. Instead, he pointed to the ground around our RV. "Look at the tracks." In the soft dirt near our site, clear as day, were bare footprints. Human feet, but wrong somehow. The impressions were too deep, as if made by someone much heavier than they should be, and the spacing was off. The stride too long, the feet turned outward at an unnatural angle. "Someone was here last night," Michael said, his voice tight, "walking around the RV." I knelt beside one of the clearer prints, my stomach knotting. The foot was the right size to be mine. "Michael, these look like yours, I know." He was already walking the perimeter, following the trail. "But that's impossible. You were with me all night." The footprints formed a complete circle around our RV, as if someone had walked slowly around and around, studying us. But there were no prints leading to or away from the circle. They simply began and ended at the same point near our fire ring. "Maybe it's from yesterday," I said weakly, "when we were setting up camp." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I remembered exactly where I'd walked the day before, and it wasn't in this pattern. Besides, we'd both been wearing shoes. Michael was staring at the petroglyphs on the nearest wall. "Sarah, come look at this." I joined him at the base of the rock face. The ancient drawings were more numerous than I'd noticed the day before, covering nearly every accessible surface. Spiral patterns, animal figures, and humans with elongated limbs. But it was one particular petroglyph that made my blood freeze. Carved into the red sandstone, weathered but still clearly visible, was a figure standing beside what looked like a rectangular shelter. Another identical figure stood a few feet away, watching the first. Both figures had the same long hair, the same feminine shape. "It looks like you," Michael said quietly. "Both figures look like you." The resemblance was uncanny, but what chilled me more was the expression on the watching figure's face. Even in the primitive carving, I could see malevolence, hunger, something predatory and wrong. We spent the morning exploring the amphitheater, trying to shake off the unease. Michael climbed partway up one of the walls, testing his rock climbing skills against the sandstone. I gathered firewood from the sparse vegetation, always conscious of the petroglyph watching from the rock face. It was while I was stacking wood that I first saw her. Movement caught my eye near the far wall of the amphitheater, perhaps 100 yards away. I looked up and froze. A woman stood in the shadow of an overhang, partially concealed by a juniper tree. She appeared to be watching us, completely still. "Michael," I called, but when I glanced toward him on the rock wall, then back to the figure, she was gone. "What is it?" Michael called back. I thought I saw someone. He scrambled down from the rocks and joined me, scanning the area where I'd pointed. "I don't see anyone." "Are you sure?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The figure had been too far away to make out details, but something about her posture, her hair, had seemed familiar, disturbingly familiar. That afternoon, while Michael worked on the RV's generator, I tried to read in my camp chair, but concentration was impossible. I kept glancing up, scanning the rock walls, the shadows between the junipers. Several more times I caught glimpses of movement, always at the edge of my vision, always gone when I looked directly. "Maybe we should head back to town," I suggested when Michael emerged from under the RV hood, grease on his hands. "Already? We just got here." He looked genuinely disappointed. "Is it the isolation? I know you've been struggling since your mom died." I wanted to tell him about the figure I'd seen, the feeling of being watched, the wrongness that seemed to permeate this place. But how could I explain without sounding paranoid or unstable? I just think maybe I'm not ready for this much solitude, I said. Michael nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. Okay, but let me try to fix this generator first. It's been running rough, and I don't want to drive back with a mechanical problem. Give me another day? I agreed, though every instinct screamed at me to leave immediately. That evening, as we cooked dinner over the camp stove, the feeling of being watched intensified. I found myself turning constantly, certain I'd glimpsed movement in my peripheral vision. Michael noticed my agitation but attributed it to grief and stress. This was supposed to be relaxing, he said, reaching across the small table to squeeze my hand. I'm sorry if I pushed too hard for this trip. It's not your fault, I assured him. But as darkness fell and the fire cast dancing shadows on the canyon walls, I couldn't shake the certainty that we were no longer alone. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside the RV. Soft, careful steps circling our campsite. I lay perfectly still, listening, afraid to wake Michael. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, always moving, always just barely audible. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I slipped out of bed and moved to the window above our dining table, pressing my face to the glass. The desert beyond was bathed in moonlight, stark and beautiful and empty. Then I saw her. She stood perhaps 50 feet from the RV, partially hidden behind one of the juniper trees. A woman in pale clothing, her hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She was facing the RV, completely motionless, watching. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at the figure. There was something wrong with her proportions, her posture. She stood too still, like a mannequin, and even at this distance in the uncertain moonlight, I could see her face. It was my face. I jerked back from the window, a cry strangling in my throat. When I looked again, she was gone. But I could still hear the footsteps, closer now, right outside the RV. "Michael," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He woke groggily, blinking in the darkness. "What's wrong?" "There's someone outside, a woman. She was watching the RV." Michael sat up, immediately alert. He grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand and moved to the window. I pressed against him, looking over his shoulder as he swept the beam across our campsite. Nothing. Empty desert. Undisturbed shadows. "I don't see anyone," he said, but he was already pulling on his jeans. "I'll check outside." "No," I grabbed his arm. "Don't go out there. Sarah, if someone's bothering us, we need to... Please, just wait until morning." Michael looked at me with concern and growing confusion. "Okay, but you're really shaken up. Are you sure you saw someone?" I wanted to tell him that I'd seen myself, that the woman watching us had my face, my hair, my body, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain something that made no sense even to me? We returned to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay listening to every sound, every whisper of wind through the junipers, every settling noise from the RV's structure. Toward dawn, I finally dozed fitfully. I woke alone. Sunlight streamed through the RV's windows, indicating it was well past our usual wake-up time. Michael's side of the bed was empty and cold. I called his name, but got no response. The RV felt hollow, abandoned. I dressed quickly and stepped outside. Our campsite looked normal. Camp chairs still arranged around the dead fire, Michael's tools scattered near the generator housing where he'd been working. But the silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even the sound of my own breathing seemed muffled. "Michael," I called, my voice echoing off the rock walls. No answer. I walked the perimeter of our camp, looking for footprints or any sign of where he might have gone. Near the base of the south wall, I found disturbed sand and the impression of boot treads leading toward what looked like a crack in the rock face. The crack was wider than it appeared from a distance, perhaps 3 feet across, extending upward into darkness. I could see scuff marks on the stone where someone had squeezed through. Michael's footprints led directly to the opening. "Michael, are you in there?" My voice disappeared into the crack without even an echo. A cool breeze flowed from the opening, carrying scents of damp stone and something else, something organic and unpleasant. I returned to the RV for a flashlight, my mind racing. Michael was an experienced hiker and rock climber, But he wouldn't have gone exploring alone without telling me, unless something had drawn him out during the night, something he'd seen or heard. Back at the crack in the wall, I aimed the flashlight beam into the opening. The passage extended back into the rock for at least 20 feet before curving out of sight. The walls were smooth, carved by water over millennia, and covered with more petroglyphs. I squeezed through the opening, my heart pounding. The passage was narrow but navigable, though the ceiling dropped so low in places that I had to duck. The petroglyphs were everywhere. Human figures, animals, and strange spiral patterns that seemed to move in the dancing flashlight beam. After perhaps 40 feet, the passage opened into a large chamber. I swept the flashlight across the space, trying to understand what I was seeing. The chamber was roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. More petroglyphs covered every surface, but these were different from the ones outside. More detailed, more disturbing. Dozens of human figures covered the walls, all variations on the same theme. Each showed two identical people, one watching the other with expressions of malevolence or hunger. Some showed the watching figure approaching the other. Others depicted violence or transformation. And in the center of the chamber, carved into the stone floor, was a perfect spiral pattern perhaps 6 feet across. At the center of the spiral lay Michael's flashlight. "Michael," I called, but my voice was swallowed by the stone dome. I approached the spiral cautiously, flashlight beam playing across the intricate carvings. The pattern was hypnotic, drawing the eye inward toward the center where Michael's flashlight rested. As I got closer, I noticed dark stains on the stone. Not recent, but not ancient either. The stains formed their own pattern, as if liquid had been poured or spilled in specific configurations. I picked up Michael's flashlight, noting that it was still warm. He'd been here recently, but where was he now? A sound from the passage behind me made me spin around. A soft scraping, like someone squeezing through the narrow entrance. I aimed my flashlight at the opening and called out, "Michael, is that you?" The scraping stopped. Silence stretched for long seconds, then resumed, getting closer. Someone was definitely moving through the passage, but they weren't responding to my calls. I backed away from the entrance, deeper into the chamber, my light fixed on the opening. The scraping grew louder, accompanied now by an odd dragging sound, as if whoever was coming was having difficulty navigating the narrow space. A figure appeared in the entrance to the chamber. It was Michael, but wrong. He stood in the opening, illuminated by my flashlight beam, wearing the same clothes he'd had on the night before, but his posture was off. Too rigid, too still. And his face. Michael's face wore an expression I'd never seen before. A slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, which stared at me with cold, predatory interest. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there watching me like I was something to be studied. "Michael," I whispered, "are you okay?" The thing wearing Michael's face tilted its head slightly, the unnatural smile widening. When it spoke, it was Michael's voice, but the cadence was wrong. Too slow, too measured. "Sarah, I've been waiting for you." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber had only one entrance, and Michael, or whatever this was, blocked it completely. "You seem afraid," Not Michael continued, taking a step into the chamber. Its movement was off, too fluid, like it wasn't quite used to controlling Michael's body. "There's no reason to be afraid. I've been watching you for so long." "What are you?" I managed. The smile widened further, showing too many teeth. "I'm you, Sarah. I'm the part of you that watches from the shadows, the part that sees what you refuse to acknowledge. I've been waiting for you to come here, to this place of reflection and transformation." It took another step forward, and I could see that its eyes were wrong. They reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's, showing depths that shouldn't exist in human eyes. "Where's Michael?" I demanded, backing further into the chamber. "Michael served his purpose. He brought you here, to this place where the boundary is thin, where I can finally step through." The thing gestured at the petroglyphs surrounding us. "This has happened before, many times. People come to places like this, places where reality bends, and they meet themselves. The Watchers. The ones who exist in reflection. I was pressed against the far wall now, the carved spiral at my feet. The thing wearing Michael's face approached slowly, savoring my terror. You've seen me, haven't you? Standing in the shadows, watching from the edges. I've been growing stronger, more real, feeding on your grief and fear and isolation. And now, in this place of power, I can finally take what's mine. You can't have it, I said, though my voice shook. You can't have my life. But I already do. Its voice was changing, becoming higher, more feminine. Michael's features were shifting subtly, becoming more angular, more like my own. I've been living it in reflection, experiencing everything you experience, feeling everything you feel. But reflection isn't enough anymore. I want to be real. I want to cast my own shadow. The transformation was accelerating now. Michael's brown eyes were lightening to match my green ones. His hair was lengthening, darkening. The changes were subtle but undeniable, like watching a time-lapse video of metamorphosis. The others here understood, the thing continued, gesturing at the petroglyphs. They accepted the exchange. They gave up their reality so their reflections could live. It's a fair trade. They get to exist forever in the mirror world, while I get to experience sunshine and rain and all the beautiful things the real world offers. What happened to Michael? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. The thing's smile turned sad, almost genuinely regretful. He fought the transition. Most do, at first. But he's safe now, watching from the other side. You'll see him soon enough. I looked around the chamber desperately, searching for any possible escape or weapon. The petroglyphs seemed to writhe in the flashlight beam, showing endless variations of the same horrible exchange. Real people trading places with their reflections, their doubles, their shadows made manifest. This is how it works, the thing explained, its voice now indistinguishable from my own. In places of power, places where the Earth's energy focuses and concentrates, the boundary between real and reflected becomes permeable. Mirror places, the old ones called them. Places where you can step through. The thing's transformation was nearly complete now. Looking at it was like looking in a mirror, except for the eyes. Those alien eyes that reflected light like a predator's, that held depths and hungers I couldn't fathom. You'll like it on the other side, it assured me. Everything is the same, but reflected, reversed. And you'll finally understand what it's like to watch, to hunger, to exist only in the spaces between reality. I felt the carved spiral beneath my feet and remembered the dark stains, the patterns that suggested ritual and sacrifice. This chamber had seen this exchange many times before. Travelers drawn to this remote place, confronted by their reflections, their doubles, their shadow selves. The thing reached out toward me, its hand, my hand, pale and grasping. Come, Sarah, it's time to step through. I jerked away from its touch and felt my foot slip into one of the grooves of the spiral pattern. Pain shot through my ankle as I fell, but the fall probably saved my life. As I tumbled, my flashlight beam swept across the chamber ceiling, revealing something I'd missed in my initial scan. There were more petroglyphs up there, barely visible in the shadows, but these were different from the others. These showed the watching figures being defeated, banished, sent back to the mirror world. And they all had one thing in common: fire. The thing wearing my face looked down at me with predatory patience. You can't escape, Sarah. This is meant to be. I've been growing stronger for months, feeding on your grief and isolation. Your mother's death was the perfect catalyst. All that pain and loss and searching for meaning. It made you vulnerable, opened the cracks where I could seep through, but I was no longer listening. I was staring at the ceiling, at the petroglyphs showing fire driving back the Watchers, the doubles, the reflected ones. Fire and light, and the bright reality of the physical world. My flashlight was dying, the beam growing dimmer. Soon, I'd be trapped in darkness with this thing, this predatory reflection that wanted to steal my life. But I had one more source of light. I pulled the spare flashlight from my pocket, Michael's flashlight still warm from his touch. As I gripped it, I felt a moment of connection, as if some part of him was still present, still fighting. "Michael," I whispered, "if you're in there, help me." The thing tilted its head, confused by my apparent surrender. "He can't help you now. He's on the other side in the reflection, but you'll see him soon." I aimed both flashlights at the thing's face and clicked them on simultaneously. The concentrated beams struck its eyes, and the effect was immediate and dramatic. The thing shrieked, a sound that was part human scream and part something else entirely. The sound of breaking glass, of mirrors shattering. Its carefully constructed appearance began to waver and distort. Michael's stolen features flickered like a bad television signal, revealing something underneath that my mind refused to process completely. Something with too many angles, too many reflective surfaces. Something that existed in the spaces between real and unreal. "Light," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You can't stand direct light. That's why you hide in shadows, why you only come out at night. You're not real, you're just a reflection, and reflections can't exist without something to reflect off of." The thing was backing away now, its form continuing to flicker and distort. "You don't understand," it snarled, its voice becoming hollow, echoing. "I can be real. I just need to complete the exchange." But I was already moving, flashlight beams trained on its retreating form. The petroglyphs on the ceiling had been right. Light was the weapon, the tool for banishing these reflected horrors back to whatever mirror dimension they came from. The thing retreated to the chamber entrance, its form now barely maintaining cohesion. I could see through it in places, see the rock wall behind where its chest should be solid. "This isn't over," it hissed. "I know where you live now. I know your world. I'll find other ways through, other cracks to seep between. Then I'll be ready," I said, advancing with both lights blazing. The thing gave one final shriek of rage and frustration before dissolving completely, leaving only the scent of ozone and something like burning mirrors. I was alone in the chamber, both flashlights casting overlapping pools of light on the ancient stone. The petroglyphs seemed to pulse with approval, the carved figures of defenders and light-bearers welcoming another small victory against the watching darkness. But where was Michael? I searched the chamber thoroughly, calling his name, but found no trace of him. The thing had said he was on the other side, in the reflection. But what did that mean? Was he dead? Trapped somehow in whatever mirror dimension these creatures came from? I spent another hour exploring the chamber and the passage leading back to the surface, but found nothing. No sign of struggle, no indication of what had happened to my husband. It was as if he'd simply stepped out of reality entirely. Finally, with both flashlights beginning to dim and no other options, I made my way back through the narrow passage to the outside world. The amphitheater felt different now, less oppressive, less watched. The petroglyphs on the outer walls seemed harmless, just ancient art rather than warnings or instructions. But our campsite told a different story. Michael's belongings were gone, not just moved or scattered, completely absent. His clothes, his tools, his toiletries, even his coffee cup from the night before. The RV showed no signs that a second person had ever been there. Only my things remained, arranged as if I'd been camping alone the entire time. I searched frantically through every compartment, every storage space, looking for some trace of Michael's presence. But there was nothing. According to the physical evidence, I had driven to this remote canyon alone and spent 2 days by myself. Except for the footprints. They were still there in the dirt around our campsite. Bare footprints in my size, forming that perfect circle around where the RV was parked. But now I understood what they represented. They weren't my footprints from setup or exploration. They were the tracks of the Watcher, the reflection, the thing that had been circling our camp and studying us, learning to mimic human behavior, learning to mimic me. I packed up camp with mechanical efficiency, my mind numb with shock and loss. The generator that Michael had been working on started immediately, purring with perfect efficiency. The RV showed no signs of mechanical problems at all. The drive back to Moab was a nightmare of confusion and disorientation. My GPS remained dead, but the printed map that should have guided us back showed only blank areas where our campsite had been. According to the map, There was no access road, no camping area, nothing but solid rock formations for miles in every direction. I followed tire tracks and instinct, taking turns that felt right even when they contradicted the useless map. Several times I found myself on roads that seemed familiar but couldn't be right. Roads that curved in impossible directions or led to vistas I was certain I'd never seen before. It took 6 hours to cover what should have been a 15-mile journey. When I finally reached pavement and cell service, I was shaking with exhaustion and terror. The first thing I did was call Michael's number, praying he would answer, that somehow this would all turn out to be a misunderstanding or elaborate prank. His phone went straight to voicemail, a voicemail that no longer existed. The number had been disconnected. I drove straight to the Moab police station, but my story made no sense even to me. I told them my husband was missing, that we'd been camping together and he'd vanished overnight. But when they asked for details, where we'd been camping, when we'd arrived, why there was no record of Michael's presence in any of our recent activities, I had no good answers. The officer who took my statement was patient but clearly skeptical. "Ma'am, according to your RV registration and your gas receipts, you've been traveling alone this entire time. Are you sure you didn't just imagine your husband was with you?" I wanted to scream that of course I was sure, that I'd been married to Michael for 2 years, that he'd bought the RV and planned the trip. But when I reached for my phone to show them photos of us together, I found nothing. Our wedding pictures were gone. Photos from our honeymoon, our anniversary, every shared memory had been erased. According to every piece of evidence, Michael Williams had never existed. The drive back to Phoenix was a blur of highways and rest stops, my mind cycling endlessly through possible explanations, hallucinations brought on by grief and stress, some kind of psychotic break triggered by isolation, carbon monoxide poisoning from the RV's systems causing false memories and delusions. But I knew the truth, even if I couldn't prove it. The thing in the chamber had succeeded, at least partially. It had traded places with Michael, pulling him into the mirror world and taking his place in reality. But something had gone wrong with the exchange. Instead of cleanly swapping our realities, it had erased Michael entirely, wiping him from existence as if he'd never been born. I was the only one who remembered him, the only one who knew he'd ever existed. Back in Phoenix, I found our apartment exactly as I'd left it, but transformed. Michael's belongings were gone, but not in a way that suggested they'd been removed. They had simply never been there. His side of the closet showed no signs of ever having been occupied. His toiletries had never been in the bathroom. His books had never been on the shelves. Our wedding photos had been replaced by pictures of me alone at various locations, the same church, the same reception hall, but just me smiling at the camera. A single woman celebrating. What? My birthday? Some personal achievement? I spent weeks trying to find some trace of Michael's existence. I called his workplace, but they'd never heard of him. I contacted his family, but the phone numbers belonged to strangers who'd never heard the name Williams. I searched social media, public records, anything that might prove Michael had once been real. Nothing. The only evidence of his existence was in my own memories. Memories that felt increasingly fragile and uncertain as weeks passed. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if I really had imagined him, if grief and isolation had created an elaborate delusion of companionship and love. But then I would remember the thing in the chamber, the way it had flickered and distorted when I shone light on it, the admission that it fed on reflection and shadow, and I would remember Michael's flashlight, still warm when I found it in the center of the spiral. He had been real. The creature had taken him, erased him, pulled him into whatever mirror dimension it came from. And somewhere in that reversed world, Michael was probably still fighting, still trying to find his way back to me. That thought kept me going through the long months that followed. I threw myself into research, reading everything I could find about mirror dimensions, reflected realities, places where the boundary between real and unreal grew thin. Most of it was folklore and superstition, but patterns emerged. Stories of travelers who encountered their doubles, their shadows, their reflected selves in remote places of power, and occasionally stories of people who fought back successfully. I learned about light and reflection, about the physics of mirrors and the psychology of doppelgangers. I studied the petroglyphs I'd photographed in the chamber, comparing them to similar markings found in other parts of the Southwest. Slowly, a picture emerged of an ancient understanding, a knowledge that had been preserved in stone for thousands of years. The Watchers, the Doubles, the Reflected Ones. They had always been there, existing in the spaces between reality and reflection. But they were not invincible. Light could banish them, fire could drive them back, and sometimes, rarely, the exchange could be reversed. I began to prepare. It took me almost a year to gather the equipment and knowledge I needed. Industrial-grade flashlights, flares, even a small generator to power stronger lights. I studied maps and satellite imagery, trying to locate the canyon where we'd camped. It didn't appear on any official surveys, but I found references to it in older documents, geological surveys from the early 1900s that mentioned anomalous formations and areas of unusual magnetic activity. The return trip to Utah was planned with military precision. I drove the same RV. I'd never been able to bring myself to sell it, loaded with enough lighting equipment to illuminate a small stadium. If the thing in the chamber thought it could erase the only person I'd ever truly loved and get away with it, it had badly underestimated human determination. Finding the canyon again was easier than I'd expected. The roads appeared on my GPS this time, clearly marked and well-maintained. It was as if the place wanted to be found, as if it was eager for another chance at the exchange it had botched the first time. The amphitheater looked exactly as I remembered it. Towering red walls, ancient petroglyphs, the narrow crack leading to the chamber. But this time, I was ready. I set up a perimeter of battery-powered floodlights around the entire campsite, creating an overlapping network of illumination that left no shadows, no dark spaces where reflected things could hide. Then I waited. As the sun set and darkness crept across the desert, my lights blazed like a beacon. The generator hummed steadily, feeding power to the main floods while smaller battery units provided backup illumination. I sat in the center of my circle of light, surrounded by spare flashlights and flares, and called out to the darkness. "I know you're out there," I said, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I know you can hear me. I want Michael back." For hours, nothing happened. The desert remained empty, the petroglyphs silent. But gradually, I became aware of movement at the very edges of my illuminated perimeter. Shadows that moved independently of their sources. Dark figures that vanished when I turned my lights directly on them. They were gathering, drawn by my presence and my challenge. The Watchers, the Doubles, the Reflected Ones. But they couldn't approach through my wall of light. "Give him back," I shouted into the darkness. "You took him illegally. The exchange wasn't completed. He doesn't belong in your world." A voice answered from somewhere beyond my lights. My own voice, hollow and echoing. "He chose to stay," it said. "He chose reflection over reality, shadow over light. Why do you think he brought you to that place? He wanted to disappear, to exist only in the spaces between what is and what might be." "Liar," I said, but doubt crept into my voice. Had Michael been unhappy? Had our marriage been failing in ways I hadn't recognized? He loved me. He loved our life together. Laughter drifted from the darkness, cruel and mocking. "Love? He brought you to a place of exchange, a place where doubles are born and realities are traded. Do you think that was coincidence? He researched that canyon for months, found the old stories, the legends. He knew exactly what that place was." The words hit me like physical blows. Michael's obsession with finding the perfect remote camping spot, his insistence on going somewhere with no cell service, no neighbors, no witnesses. Had he planned this? Had he wanted to disappear into the mirror world, leaving me behind? "No," I said firmly. "Whatever you've done to him, whatever lies you've told him or made him believe, I'm here to bring him home." I stood up, grabbing the most powerful flashlight in my arsenal, a spotlight capable of throwing a beam visible for miles. I aimed it at the crack in the canyon wall and began walking forward, my circle of light moving with me. "Michael," I called. "I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. I'm coming for you." The shadows at the edge of my lights writhed and recoiled, but they couldn't stop me. Step by step, I approached the narrow opening that led to the chamber. The petroglyphs seemed to glow in my artificial daylight, their ancient warnings and instructions clearer than ever. I squeezed through the passage, my lights blazing ahead of me, driving back whatever dark things might be lurking in the stone corridor. The chamber opened up before me exactly as I remembered it. Dome ceiling, spiral pattern carved in the floor, walls covered with images of watchers and doubles, but now there were new figures in the petroglyphs, carved in the stone with impossible precision and detail, were images of Michael and me, our story preserved in living rock. Our arrival at the canyon, our setup, the circling footprints, the thing wearing Michael's face, and at the center of it all, the exchange that had gone wrong. "I'm here," I announced to the empty chamber. "I'm here with enough light to drive back every shadow in this place. Give me my husband back." The temperature in the chamber dropped suddenly and my breath began to fog. Ice crystals formed on the stone walls despite the warm desert night outside. Something was coming through, something that brought winter with it. Michael stepped out of the wall. Not through an opening or doorway, literally out of the solid stone, as if it were water instead of rock. But this wasn't the thing that had impersonated him before. This was really Michael, though changed. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes held depths that hadn't been there before. He moved like someone learning to walk again, uncertain and careful. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was his own, though it carried the strange echoes. "You came back." "Of course I came back," I said, fighting tears. "I've been looking for you for a year. I've been trying to understand what happened, how to get you back." Michael looked around the chamber, his gaze lingering on the petroglyphs showing our story. "It's been much longer than a year for me. Time works differently on the other side. I've been watching, trying to find a way back, but the reflection world has its own rules. The thing that took your place," I said. "It told me you chose to go, that you brought me here deliberately. Is that true?" Michael's face crumpled with pain and regret. "Yes and no. I did research the canyon. I did know what it was, but not because I wanted to disappear. I thought I could control it, use it somehow. I've been having dreams, Sarah. Dreams where I saw myself watching me from mirrors, from windows, from dark water. I thought if I came here, to a place of power, I could confront it directly. Instead, it confronted you. It was stronger than I expected, more real, and it fed on my doubts, my fears about our relationship, about whether I was good enough for you. It showed me all the ways I was failing you, all the ways you might be better off without me. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I aimed my spotlight at the center of the chamber, where the spiral pattern carved in the floor seemed to pulse with its own inner light. How do I get you back? How do we reverse the exchange? You don't understand, Michael said, and I could see through him now, see the stone wall behind his increasingly translucent form. I don't think I can come back, not completely. I've been in the reflection world too long. I'm part of it now. No, I said firmly, I won't accept that. There has to be a way. Michael smiled sadly. There might be, but it would require a different kind of exchange. Not trading places, but sharing. Existing partially in both worlds, never fully real in either. I understood immediately. You mean becoming like them. Like the Watchers. Not like them. They're parasites feeding on reality from the outside. But there might be a way to exist in both worlds simultaneously. To be real and reflected at the same time. It would mean giving up normal life, normal existence. We could never have the life we planned. I looked around the chamber at the petroglyphs showing countless exchanges, countless tragic endings. But there, in the newest carvings, I could see another possibility. Figures that existed in both worlds, that cast shadows in reality and light in reflection. Would we be together? I asked. Yes, always. Then do it. Michael stepped toward me, his form solidifying as he approached my lights. Are you sure? Once we make this choice, there's no going back. We'll exist between worlds, never fully belonging to either. I thought of the empty apartment, the erased photos, the year of grief and searching and desperate loneliness. I thought of a life without Michael, a reality where he had never existed at all. I'm sure Michael reached out and took my hand. His touch was cold but real, substantial despite his translucent appearance. The moment our skin made contact, I felt the change begin. The chamber filled with light that didn't come from my flashlights, a soft, silvery radiance that emanated from the walls themselves. The petroglyphs began to move, showing the story of our choice, our decision to exist between realities rather than lose each other entirely. I felt myself becoming less solid, less anchored to the physical world. But, at the same time, I could sense new dimensions opening around us, new ways of existing that weren't bound by the normal rules of reality. We were becoming something new, something that had never been tried before. When the light faded, we stood together in the chamber, hand in hand, both of us translucent but real. I could feel Michael's presence more clearly than ever before, not just beside me but intertwined with me, sharing the same space between worlds. "It's done," he said, and his voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. We walked together back through the passage to the outside world. The desert looked the same, but different, as if I was seeing it through multiple filters simultaneously. My lights still blazed around the campsite, but they seemed unnecessary now. We existed in our own bubble of reality, our own space between the physical and the reflected. The RV sat in the center of my illuminated perimeter, exactly as I'd left it. But now it seemed like a relic of another life, another existence we would never return to. We would need to learn new ways of being, new ways of interacting with a world where we were no longer fully present. "What happens now?" I asked. Michael squeezed my hand, his touch more real now that we shared the same state of existence. "Now, we learn to live between the mirrors. We find others like us, others who chose love over reality. We make a new kind of life." I nodded, understanding that this was not an ending, but a beginning. We had found a third option, a way to exist that neither the physical world nor the reflection world had expected. We were pioneers in a new kind of reality, explorers of the spaces between what is and what might be. As we walked away from the campsite, leaving behind the blazing lights and the empty RV, I felt a peace I hadn't known since the day Michael first disappeared. We were together again, and nothing, not death, not distance, not the hungry watchers that fed on reality, could separate us now. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice, if we should have found another way. But in the quiet moments between day and night, between real and reflected, when Michael and I exist in perfect harmony in the spaces between worlds, I know we chose correctly. We chose love over everything else, and in the end, that's the only choice that matters. The desert remembers us, and the canyon holds our story in its ancient stone. Future travelers will see our petroglyphs and understand that there is always another choice, always another way to exist when the normal rules fail. We are the watchers now, but we watch with love instead of hunger. And sometimes, when other couples arrive at the canyon facing impossible choices, we help them find the third option, the path between realities where love can transcend the boundaries of what is possible. The mirror world and the physical world continue their eternal dance, but we dance between them, casting shadows in both and belonging fully to neither. And we are finally, impossibly, eternally together.